The polished brass plaque gleamed under museum lights. Colonel Jack Steele ran weathered fingers over the engraved words, M4 Sherman tank, the backbone of Allied armored victory. His reflection stared back from the immaculate surface of the olive-green hull. 75 years old now, with snow-white hair cropped in the same military cut he'd worn since 1943, Jack stood silent before the machine that had defined his life. Around him, the Patton Tank Museum hummed with visitors. School children pressed noses against display cases. Veterans nodded respectfully at exhibits. But Jack remained motionless before the Sherman, lost between two worlds. "Colonel Steele?" A museum docent approached. "They're ready for your speech, sir." Jack nodded without turning. "Just need another minute with her." Alone again, his mind slipped backward through the decades. Not to the triumphs or the medals or the promotions, but to a crisp autumn day in Detroit, 1943. The date everything changed. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal sprawled across 11 acres of Detroit real estate, a cathedral of American industrial might. Jack Steele, then 35, strode through the assembly floor, clipboard in hand, watching as Sherman tanks took shape under the hands of thousands of workers. Women in bandanas tightened bolts. Former auto workers calibrated gun turrets. The air smelled of hot metal, engine grease, in purpose. "Steele!" The floor manager waved from the testing bay. "Got something you should see." Jack changed course, his well-polished shoes clicking against concrete. Chief engineer at Chrysler, he had helped transition the factory from automobile production to weapons of war. His expertise in engine design had earned him respect throughout the industry. 3 years into the war, he had personally overseen improvements to the Sherman power plant that increased horsepower while reducing maintenance needs. The factory intercom crackled. "Jack Steele to the administrative office. Jack Steele to administrative immediately." Jack frowned. "Hold that thought, Bill. Let me see what this is about." In the administration office, Jack found his secretary standing with 2 Army officers. Her eyes were red. One officer held his hat in his hands, a telltale sign that made Jack's stomach clench. "Mr. Steele," the taller officer said, "is there somewhere private we can speak?" The telegram was crisp and formal. Technical Sergeant Robert Steele, serving with the 2nd Armored Division in North Africa, had been killed in action. His Sherman tank had been hit by enemy fire. There had been no survivors. Jack sat perfectly still, the yellow paper trembling slightly in his fingers. "Your son died a hero," the officer said. "His unit was protecting a medical evacuation." Words without meaning. Jack had begged Robert not to enlist after Pearl Harbor, promising to use connections to secure him an engineering position stateside. But Robert had inherited his father's stubbornness alongside his mechanical aptitude. "They need men who understand these machines, Dad," he had said. "I can make a difference over there." Now he was gone. 22 years old. That night, Jack sat alone in his study surrounded by technical drawings of Sherman modifications. His eyes fell on a framed photograph of Robert at 16, grinning beside the family Packard with grease on his cheeks, having just rebuilt the transmission. On his desk lay a half-empty bottle of bourbon and the last letter Robert had sent. He picked up the letter, rereading words he had already committed to memory. "The Sherman is a good tank, Dad, but these Tigers are monsters. Yesterday we hit one square at 600 yards and the shell just bounced off. Johnson says it's like throwing rocks at a crocodile. The guys in the British units say the same thing. We need something better than the 75mm gun, something with real punch. I know you're working on improvements back home. Whatever you come up with, make it soon." Jack lifted a technical manual for the M4 Sherman. He knew every specification, every strength, every weakness. He had helped design parts of it, had championed it, had sent his own son to war in it, and it had failed. The bourbon glass paused halfway to his lips. A cold clarity washed over him. He picked up his telephone. "Get me the War Department," he told the operator. "I need to speak with General Williams in Ordnance." 3 weeks later, Jack Steele stood at attention before Brigadier General Howard Williams at the Pentagon. His new Army uniform felt stiff and formal after years of business attire. "You understand this is highly irregular," Williams said, reviewing the papers on his desk. "Men your age typically do not enlist, especially not men with your expertise in vital war production. With respect, sir, I can do more good in the field. I know these tanks inside and out. I know their flaws and how to correct them." Williams studied him. "This has something to do with your son." Jack held the general's gaze. "My son died because we sent him into battle with inadequate equipment. I intend to ensure that doesn't happen to anyone else's son. And you think the Sherman is inadequate? Against panthers and tigers? Yes, sir, I do, but it doesn't have to be. We can improve it. I can improve it, William sighed. Ordinarily, I'd send you back to Detroit, but as it happens, we've been developing upgrades to the Sherman. Two distinct approaches, actually. Your expertise could be valuable in evaluating them. He closed the folder. Congratulations, Captain Steele. You're being assigned as technical liaison to the 6th Armored Division in England. They're preparing for the invasion and they'll be testing both variants. As Jack saluted and turned to leave, the general added, Captain, this won't bring your boy back. Jack paused at the door. No, sir, but it might bring someone else's boy home. That night, alone in temporary officer quarters, Jack reviewed everything he knew about the Sherman's vulnerabilities. The high profile made it an easy target. The narrow tracks limited mobility in soft terrain. The gasoline engine was prone to catching fire when hit. The 75mm gun lacked penetrating power against heavy German armor. Most critically, he had discovered, through classified reports, that Sherman crews had given their tank a grim nickname, the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter, whose advertisements promised lights first time, every time. When hit, the Sherman's ammunition storage often ignited, creating a death trap for its crew. Jack pulled out Robert's last letter again. At the bottom was a postscript he had initially overlooked in his grief. P.S. There's talk about a new gun the British are testing, something called the 17-pounder. Supposed to cut through Panther armor like butter. Find out what you can about it, would you, Dad? He reached for a fresh sheet of paper and began sketching modifications. If the Sherman couldn't be replaced, it would have to be improved, and he would make damn sure those improvements saved lives. Jack Steele fell asleep at his desk, technical drawings scattered around him. His son's letter clutched in his hand, his mission now crystal clear. Chapter 2, Deadly Limitations. England, April 1944. Rain lashed against the corrugated metal roof of the maintenance shed. Captain Jack Steele stood watching as Sherman tanks rolled in from field exercises, mud caked on their tracks, exhaust billowing in the damp air. 2 months since his arrival, the reality of frontline service had proved both more mundane and more urgent than he had imagined. The preparations for the cross-channel invasion consumed every waking hour, and with each passing day, intelligence reports painted an increasingly dire picture of what waited on the other side. Still getting used to being called Captain instead of Mr.? Asked Major Thomas Reynolds, approaching through the rain. Jack nodded. The uniform feels strange after 20 years in a suit and tie. Well, you wear it well enough. The men respect you. Not many officers understand the mechanics like you do. They walked together into the maintenance bay where a Sherman sat with its engine access panels removed. Jack immediately noted the problem. Timing belt slippage, third one this week. How could you possibly know that from just looking at it? Jack knelt by the exposed engine. The wear pattern on the auxiliary drive, seen it 100 times back in Detroit. We need to adjust the specifications on these belts. They're too narrow for the torque load. Reynolds smiled. And that's why General Williams sent you to us. Come on, there's something I want you to see. They drove through the rain to a closely guarded hangar at the edge of the base. Military police checked their identification before allowing them inside. The cavernous space was divided by canvas partitions. The sound of metalwork echoed against steel beams. Welcome to what we affectionately call the garage, Reynolds said. Our little skunk works. Jack followed him past teams of mechanics and engineers hunched over components. Some he recognized as standard Sherman parts. Others were entirely unfamiliar. We've been receiving some specialized equipment, Reynolds explained. Modifications from both our people and the British. High Command wants field testing before the invasion. They rounded a partition, and Jack stopped in his tracks. Before him stood a Sherman, unlike any he had seen before. The most striking difference was the gun, a long, wicked-looking barrel that extended well beyond the normal length of the 75mm. Meet the Sherman Firefly, Reynolds said with undisguised pride. British modification. They've somehow shoehorned their 17-pounder anti-tank gun into our Sherman turret. Nasty piece of work. Muzzle velocity nearly twice our 75mm, can punch through a Tiger's frontal armor at 1,000 yards. Jack circled the tank slowly, professional assessment giving way to something approaching reverence. This is what Robert mentioned in his last letter, he said quietly. Beyond the gun, he noted dozens of small modifications. The radio had been relocated to the turret rear. The gun breech was enormous, dominating the turret interior. He climbed up and peered inside. The fighting compartment was cramped, with barely enough room for the loader to maneuver. Crew comfort was sacrificed for firepower, Reynolds acknowledged. Loading is slower, visibility is compromised. But when that 17-pounder speaks, German tanks listen. How many do we have? Not enough. The Brits are converting as many as they can. But it's specialized work. Can't be done on a standard assembly line. Reynolds checked his watch. That's only half the story, though. Come see America's answer. They walked to another section of the hangar. Here stood another modified Sherman, but with different characteristics. Its hull sat on a visibly different suspension system, with wider tracks and a slightly lower profile. M4A3E8, Reynolds said. We call it the Easy 8. Horizontal volute spring suspension gives a smoother ride, better weight distribution, wider tracks for less ground pressure. Still has the 4 GAA V8 engine, but upgraded cooling systems. And while it doesn't have the Firefly 17-pounder, it does mount a high-velocity 76mm gun. Better than our standard 75mm, though not quite the tank killer that the 17-pounder is. Jack ran his hand along the hull, feeling the quality of the welds. Wet stowage ammunition storage? Yes. Surrounds the shells with a liquid jacket to reduce fire risk if penetrated. After what happened in North Africa, this was a priority improvement. Jack climbed up and into the commander's hatch. The interior layout was familiar but refined. More space than the Firefly. Better ergonomics for the crew. The gun breech was proportional, allowing the loader room to work efficiently. So these are our options, Jack said, emerging from the turret. British firepower versus American mobility and crew efficiency. Reynolds nodded. That's why you're here, Captain. You know these machines better than anyone. We need to know which approach to prioritize before the invasion. Jack stared at the two tanks, seeing not just metal and machinery, but the lives they would carry into battle. I need to understand them completely. Not just the specifications, but how they perform under fire, how the crews interact with them. You'll get your chance. We're assembling crews for field trials next week. Reynolds handed him a folder. These are the complete technical specifications for both variants. Study them. Know them. The success of the invasion may depend on having the right tank for the job. That night, Jack spread the documents across his bunk. The differences between the two approaches were striking. The Firefly was a surgeon's scalpel, a precision weapon designed to eliminate the most dangerous threat on the battlefield. The Easy 8 was a boxer blending mobility, protection, and adequate firepower in a balanced package. The Firefly could penetrate 110 mm of armor at 2,000 yards, compared to the 76mm gun's 98mm at the same distance. But the Easy 8 could traverse difficult terrain that would bog down a standard Sherman, and its gun could fire a complete range of ammunition types, from high explosive for infantry support to white phosphorus for smoke screening. Most critically, the Firefly required 7 seconds between shots due to the awkward loading arrangement, while the Easy 8 maintained the standard Sherman's 4-second rate of fire. As Jack reviewed the performance data, a knock came at his door. A young lieutenant stood at attention. Captain Steele, sorry to disturb you, sir. Colonel Harrison asked me to deliver this. The lieutenant handed over a sealed envelope and departed. Inside, Jack found a handwritten note. Captain Steele, reports from intelligence indicate German armor's strength is greater than previously estimated. Expect to face Panthers and Tigers in significant numbers during the invasion. Your evaluation of our Sherman upgrades has become priority. You will meet your tank crews at 0700 hours tomorrow. I expect your preliminary report in 1 week. Harrison, Colonel. Jack tucked the note among his papers. As he did, his eyes fell on a black and white reconnaissance photograph showing a German Tiger tank. The massive vehicle dwarfed the destroyed Sherman burning beside it. Someone had scrawled across the bottom, 75mm shells bounced off like tennis balls. Jack reached into his footlocker and withdrew Robert's last letter. He placed it next to the Tiger photograph. I'm working on it, son, he whispered. I'm working on it. At 0700 hours the next morning, Jack stood before 5 men in the rain, his new tank crew. They were a study in contrast. Sergeant Mike Bronx Rizzo, the driver, was a compact, muscular former mechanic from New York with quick eyes and quicker hands. Corporal Sam Doc Williams, the bow gunner, had been a medical student before the war, his thoughtful manner at odds with his role. Private Thomas Kid Johnson was barely 19, a farm boy from Kansas whose long limbs made him well-suited to the loader position. Sergeant Frank Eagle Eye Martinez, the gunner, was a former hunting guide from Arizona with a reputation for marksmanship. Technical Sergeant William Cooper rounded out the crew as assistant driver and radio operator. "Gentlemen," Jack began, "over the next week we will be testing two upgraded versions of the M4 Sherman tank. You have all had combat experience in the standard model. I want to know everything about how these new versions compare. Nothing is too small to report. If a lever is 1 inch out of position and it affects your performance, I want to know about it." Rizzo stepped forward. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Always, Sergeant. Word is you came from the factory, that you helped design these things." "That's correct. I was chief engineer at Chrysler Tank Arsenal before commissioning." "Then with all due respect, sir, you should know the Sherman's a death trap against Tigers. We call them Ronsons because they light up when hit, every damn time." Uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Jack looked at each man in turn, seeing the same knowledge in their eyes. These were survivors, men who had seen comrades burn. "I know about the flaws, Sergeant. My son died in a Sherman in North Africa. That's why I'm here, to make sure we fix what can be fixed." The atmosphere shifted subtly. Jack was no longer just an officer or an engineer. He was a father who had lost his son to the same dangers they faced. "These upgrades address different vulnerabilities," Jack continued. "The Firefly gives us the firepower to take out Tigers and Panthers from beyond their effective range. The Easy 8 improves mobility and crew survivability. Both have strengths. Both have weaknesses. Our job is to determine which combination gives our forces the best chance when we cross the channel." "And if neither does?" Martinez asked quietly. Jack met his gaze. "Then we tell the truth, Sergeant, and we find a third option." The rain intensified, drumming on their helmets. "Colonel Harrison has authorized live fire exercises beginning tomorrow at 0900. Until then, familiarize yourselves with the technical specifications." He handed each man a document folder. "Study these, know them. Your lives may depend on it." As the men dispersed, Colonel Harrison approached, umbrella sheltering his uniform. A West Point graduate with family connections in Washington, Harrison had the polished bearing of a man accustomed to authority. "Captain Steele," he said briskly, "a word." They walked toward headquarters, shoes sinking into English mud. "I understand your background gives you unique insights, Steele, but remember your role here. We need an objective technical assessment, not emotional appeals based on personal tragedy." Jack kept his voice level. "Is that what you think I'm doing, sir? I think you came here with an agenda. The loss of your son is regrettable, but we have an invasion to plan. The Sherman is the backbone of our armored forces. Hundreds of thousands of men have trained on it. Our logistics chain is built around it. Our factories are tooled to produce it in numbers that overwhelm the enemy. Numbers won't matter if they can't penetrate enemy armor, Colonel." Harrison stopped, fixing Jack with a cold stare. "The War Department believes differently. Our doctrine is built on mobility and mass. Quantity has a quality all its own, Captain. Remember that when you file your report." As Harrison walked away, Jack stood alone in the rain. Politics, production quotas, doctrinal inertia, all of it standing between American tank crews and the equipment they needed to survive. That night, Jack sat alone in his quarters reviewing the classified casualty reports from tank engagements in North Africa and Italy. The statistics painted a grim picture. When Sherman tanks engaged Panthers or Tigers head-on, the loss ratios were catastrophic. In some battles, 5 or more Shermans had been destroyed for each German heavy tank eliminated. Most tellingly, the report showed that over 60% of Sherman losses resulted in total crew casualties, primarily due to ammunition fires. The Sherman earned its grim nickname honestly. As he read deeper, Jack discovered something even more disturbing. These reports had been available for months, yet the basic vulnerabilities of the Sherman remained unaddressed in mass production. Notes in the margins revealed intense debate between field commanders demanding better tanks and production authorities emphasizing the importance of standardization and volume. American tankers were dying for the sake of production efficiency. Jack closed the folder and reached again for Robert's letter. This time he noticed something he had overlooked before: a small diagram in Robert's handwriting showing the frontal armor layout of a Tiger tank, with thickness measurements and angles carefully noted. His son had been studying his enemy, looking for vulnerabilities, trying to survive. Jack pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began calculating armor penetration tables, plotting shell velocity against armor thickness at various distances and angles. The mathematics confirmed what the field report suggested. The standard 75 millimeter gun was woefully inadequate against German heavy tanks, except at suicidally close ranges or against vulnerable side armor. By midnight, his conclusion was inescapable. The American emphasis on quantity over quality was sending young men to their deaths. The question now was whether either the Firefly or the Easy 8 could change that equation enough to matter. As the clock struck 1, Jack made a decision. He would judge these tanks not by the metrics of production efficiency or doctrinal conformity, but by a single overriding standard. How many American sons would they bring home alive? Chapter 3, 2 Solutions, 1 Objective. Dawn broke over the firing range, revealing a landscape transformed into a quagmire by overnight rain. 6 Sherman tanks stood in formation, 2 standard models, 2 Fireflies, and 2 Easy 8s. Beyond them, at varying distances, stood the targets, salvaged German tanks, concrete bunkers, and wooden silhouettes representing infantry formations. Jack stood on a small observation platform with Colonel Harrison and a British officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Blackwood of the Royal Armored Corps. Blackwood was tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed mustache and the confident bearing of old European aristocracy. Dreadful conditions, Blackwood observed, surveying the mud. Rather like Passchendaele in the last war. Good test for the suspension systems, I suppose. Harrison grunted non-committally. The rivalry between American and British tank development teams was an open secret, with each side convinced of their approach's superiority. Captain Steele, Harrison said, begin with the standard Shermans as our baseline, then the Fireflies, then the Easy 8s. Full combat simulation with movement and firing. Jack raised his binoculars. Crew 1, standard Sherman, advance to position Alpha and engage infantry targets at 300 yards, then armored targets at 600 yards. The first Sherman lurched forward, track spinning in the mud before finding purchase. It advanced sluggishly across the field, its 75 millimeter gun traversing to track the targets. At 300 yards, it opened fire on the infantry silhouettes, the high explosive shells blasting wooden figures into splinters. When it engaged the armored targets at 600 yards, however, the limitations became immediately apparent. The armor-piercing shells struck the front plate of a captured Panther tank with visible impacts but no penetration. Only when the Sherman closed to 400 yards and fired at the side armor did it achieve a kill shot. Standard doctrine, Harrison commented. Use mobility to flank enemy armor. Attack from the sides where armor is thinner. Assuming, of course, that one survives long enough to maneuver. Blackwood replied dryly. German tanks can engage effectively beyond 1,000 yards. This Sherman would never have closed a flanking position. The second standard Sherman demonstrated similar results, effective against infantry and light obstacles, but limited against armored targets unless at close range or advantageous angles. Firefly crews advanced to position Bravo and engage armored targets at 1,000 yards, then 1,500 yards. The first Firefly moved forward, its distinctive long barrel marking it as something different. Even in the thick mud, it maintained reasonable mobility, though Jack noted the increased front weight from the massive gun affected its handling. At 1,000 yards, the Firefly's 17-pounder roared. The sound was distinctly different from the standard Sherman, a sharper crack that echoed across the range. Through his binoculars, Jack watched as the shell punched through the frontal armor of a Panther tank with apparent ease. Good God, Harrison murmured. The Firefly continued engaging targets, successfully penetrating frontal armor on both Panther and Tiger tanks at ranges out to 1,500 yards. The accuracy diminished at extreme range, but the penetrating power remained formidable. Rather changes the equation, doesn't it? Blackwood said with understated pride. No need to risk flanking maneuvers when you can defeat enemy armor frontally from beyond their effective range. Jack noted the reload times between shots, however. The Firefly's rate of fire was noticeably slower than the standard Sherman, confirming the technical data about the cramped fighting compartment. Easy 8 crews advanced to position Charlie through the marsh area, then engaged mixed targets at varying ranges. The first Easy 8 showed its advantages immediately. The improved suspension and wider tracks allowed it to navigate the worst of the mud with significantly better stability and speed. It moved with a grace that neither the standard Sherman nor the Firefly could match. When it opened fire, the 76mm gun proved a compromise between the standard 75mm and the Firefly's 17-pounder. It penetrated Panther frontal armor at 800 yards, but struggled against the Tiger. However, its rate of fire was nearly twice that of the Firefly, and its gun handling was noticeably smoother. Mobility and firepower in balance, Harrison observed, and it can be mass-produced on our existing assembly lines with minimal retooling. At the cost of less penetration power, Blackwood countered, your 76mm gun is certainly an improvement, but it cannot reliably defeat a Tiger frontally beyond 600 yards. The 17-pounder can do so at twice that distance. Jack listened to the debate while making detailed notes on each vehicle's performance. By midday, the picture was becoming clear. The standard Sherman was obsolete against modern German armor. The Firefly offered devastating firepower at the cost of reload speed and some mobility. The EZ-8 provided a more balanced improvement with superior cross-country mobility, but less penetrating power. No single solution was perfect. After the firing trials, Jack joined the crews for debriefing in a muddy tent erected near the firing range. The men were soaked and exhausted, but animated by the day's experiences. The 17-pounder is a beast, reported Martinez, the gunner who had operated both types. You can feel the difference when it hits, like a sledgehammer compared to a regular hammer. But the breach is enormous. Johnson had to contort like a circus performer to load it. Private Johnson nodded vigorously. Loading the Firefly is a nightmare, sir. The breech blocks half the turret. I couldn't maintain anything close to our normal fire rate. Rizzo, who had driven all three variants, offered his perspective. The EZ-8 is a Cadillac compared to the others. The HVSS suspension absorbs bumps that would rattle your teeth in a standard Sherman. You can maintain speed over rough ground, which means less time exposed to enemy fire. But if I had to face a Tiger, Martinez interjected, give me the Firefly every time. That 17-pounder will save your life. The debate continued, with each crew member offering insights from their particular position. Jack noted that opinions divided largely along functional lines. Drivers and mechanics preferred the EZ-8 for its improved mobility and maintenance accessibility. Gunners favored the Firefly for its penetrating power. Loaders and radio operators, concerned with internal ergonomics, leaned toward the EZ-8's more spacious fighting compartment. After the crews were dismissed, Jack found himself alone with Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood. The British officer offered him a cigarette, which Jack declined. You know, Captain, your reputation preceded you, Blackwood said. The engineer who became a soldier to avenge his son. Quite dramatic. Jack stiffened. I'm here to find the best solution for our men, Colonel. Nothing more. Of course, as am I. Blackwood exhaled smoke. The 17-pounder wasn't designed for the Sherman. We adapted it out of desperation after facing Tigers in Tunisia. Lost a lot of good men learning that our standard tanks were outclassed. We've had similar experiences. Indeed, the difference is that we adjusted our approach. Your people seem reluctant to acknowledge the problem. Blackwood studied Jack carefully. Tell me honestly, Captain, if your son had been in a Firefly instead of a standard Sherman, do you believe he might have survived? The question struck Jack like a physical blow. He had asked himself the same thing countless times. I believe he would have had a fighting chance, Jack said finally. The ability to engage German heavy tanks from beyond their effective range would have changed the equation. Precisely. Yet I sense Colonel Harrison and your War Department have already decided in favor of the EZ-8. Production efficiency trumps combat effectiveness. Very American. Jack frowned. The EZ-8 has significant advantages too. Better mobility, faster rate of fire, more balanced capabilities for the mixed combat environment we'll face in France. All true, Blackwood acknowledged, but insufficient against a Tiger at 1,000 yards. And that, Captain, is the situation your son faced in North Africa, is it not? Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to. Both men knew the answer. I'll leave you with this thought, Captain, Blackwood said, crushing out his cigarette. In the factory, efficiency may be the highest virtue. On the battlefield, survival is the only metric that matters. That evening, Jack sat alone in his quarters, technical reports spread across his desk. The day's firing trials had confirmed the specifications, but had also revealed subtleties that numbers alone couldn't capture. The way the Firefly rocked back with each powerful shot, the smooth tracking of the EZ-8 turret, the confidence in Martinez's voice when describing the 17-pounder's impact. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Major Reynolds entered, carrying a bottle and 2 glasses. Thought you might need this, Reynolds said, pouring 2 fingers of bourbon. First day of trials is always the hardest. Too much information, too many variables. Jack accepted the glass gratefully. I keep thinking about the crews, not just the machines. As you should, the finest tank in the world is useless without a crew that can fight effectively in it. Reynolds settled into the room's only chair. What's your read so far? Jack sipped his bourbon, organizing his thoughts. The Firefly gives us the ability to engage German heavy tanks from safer distances. That alone will save lives. But its rate of fire is compromised, and the ergonomics inside that turret are problematic for extended operations. And the Easy 8? Better overall fighting platform. The suspension is a game changer for cross-country mobility. The 76mm gun is a significant improvement over the 75mm, but still inadequate against Tiger frontal armor beyond medium ranges. Reynolds nodded. So neither is perfect. No, but both are substantial improvements over what we have now. And if you had to choose one? Jack stared into his glass. That's just it. The logical choice depends on the expected tactical situation. In open country with long sight lines, the Firefly dominates. In mixed terrain requiring maneuver and engaging varied targets, the Easy 8. But we'll face both conditions in France. Exactly. Jack stood and moved to a map of the French countryside pinned to his wall. Normandy has areas of bocage, small fields divided by ancient hedgerows. Terrible visibility, close engagements. Other areas are more open, with longer fields of fire. We need tanks that can operate effectively in both environments. Reynolds watched him curiously. You're not thinking about choosing one over the other, are you? Jack turned back, energy in his movements. Why should we? The Sherman is modular by design. That's its greatest strength. We've been producing hulls, turrets, guns, and suspension components as separate units from the beginning. You want both? A hybrid? No, not a hybrid. Two specialized variants with clearly defined roles. Fireflies for tank killing, Easy 8s for maneuver and infantry support, operating together in coordinated units. Reynolds considered this. Harrison won't like it. He wants a single recommendation for mass production, because that's easier for the factories. But we're not fighting a war to make life easier for production managers. Jack pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I need to work this through, the tactical implications, the production requirements. Reynolds finished his bourbon and stood. Don't stay up all night, Jack. Tomorrow's another full day of trials. After Reynolds left, Jack began sketching combined tactical formations. His engineering background merged with his growing understanding of battlefield realities. 4 tanks per platoon, 2 Easy 8s, and 2 Fireflies. The Easy 8s taking point, using their mobility to secure advantageous positions. The Fireflies providing overwatch, their powerful guns eliminating threats from maximum distance. It wasn't just a compromise between two designs. It was a new approach that leveraged the strengths of both while mitigating their individual weaknesses. As midnight approached, Jack set aside his tactical diagrams and opened his footlocker. From beneath his spare uniform, he removed a small leather case. Inside was a silver pocket watch. Engraved on the back were the words, "To Robert, may you always find your way. Love, Dad." He had given it to his son upon his graduation from high school. Robert had carried it in North Africa. Among his son's returned personal effects, the watch had been missing. Jack had assumed it lost or destroyed in the explosion that claimed Robert's tank. But 3 weeks after receiving the telegram, a package had arrived from England. Inside was the watch, along with a letter from a British tank commander named Douglas Wilson. Jack retrieved the letter from the case and reread it. Dear Mr. Steele, your son saved my life. Our units were operating together near El Alamein when we encountered German Tiger tanks. His Sherman moved to draw their fire away from our disabled tank, allowing my crew to escape. Before the engagement, he asked me to hold his pocket watch, saying something about getting it repaired in Cairo. He never made it back. I've carried it since then, intending to return it personally after the war. Upon learning of your commission and posting to England, I thought it best to send it now. Your son was the bravest man I ever met. I thought you should know that his sacrifice was not in vain. Yours respectfully, Captain D. Wilson, 8th Armored Brigade. Jack closed his fingers around the watch, feeling its weight. Robert had known the odds, had known his Sherman couldn't stand against a Tiger, had sacrificed himself anyway. It won't be in vain, Jack whispered. I promise you that. He returned to his desk with renewed purpose. If the Army wouldn't adopt a dual approach, he would find another way. There had to be a solution that would give American tankers a fighting chance against the best German armor. The alternative was unacceptable. As he worked through the night, an idea began to take shape, not just about tank design or tactical deployment, but about how to navigate the institutional resistance he faced. If Harrison and the War Department were committed to the Easy Eight for production reasons, perhaps the British connection could be leveraged. A certain number of American Shermans were already being transferred to British control under Lend-Lease. What if some of those were converted to Fireflies and then reintegrated into American units? It was unorthodox. It would require cooperation across bureaucratic boundaries, but it might save lives. Jack worked until dawn, developing his proposal. When he finally slept, it was with Robert's watch clasped in his hand, its steady ticking a metronome marking the time until the invasion would begin. Chapter 4. Brotherhood Beyond the Battlefield. Afternoon rain had given way to watery sunshine by the time Jack arrived at the maintenance hangar. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. A group of American mechanics argued with their British counterparts over an open Firefly turret. Problem? Jack asked, approaching the senior American sergeant. British design doesn't match our maintenance protocols, sir, the sergeant explained. Hydraulic systems are completely different. Parts aren't interchangeable with standard Sherman components. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood materialized at Jack's shoulder. Your mechanics are being rather precious, Captain. The modifications are well documented in the technical manuals. Manuals your people haven't shared, the sergeant countered. We're expected to maintain these vehicles in combat conditions with no training and no documentation. Jack intervened before the argument escalated. Sergeant, find Major Reynolds and tell him I need those Firefly technical manuals immediately. Colonel Blackwood, perhaps you could walk me through the key differences while we wait? The British officer nodded stiffly. Of course. As the sergeant departed, Jack examined the open turret. The complexity of fitting the massive 17-pounder into the Sherman's turret became immediately apparent. Brackets had been welded at odd angles. The recoil system had been completely redesigned. The radio had been relocated to a box welded to the turret rear. Quite the engineering challenge, Jack observed. Blackwood's pride was evident. Our designers at Lulworth accomplished in weeks what your ordnance department said was impossible. Of course, compromises were necessary, such as limited turret traverse speed, reduced ammunition stowage. The gunner lost his periscope to make room for the breech. And as your sergeant noted, maintenance is more complex. Jack climbed onto the tank and leaned into the turret, mentally mapping the modifications. How do you address crew fatigue from the cramped conditions? Rotation when possible. More frequent rest periods. The commander often assists with loading in sustained combat. Blackwood's tone softened slightly. It's not ideal, Captain. We know that. But it kills tigers, and that's what matters. Jack nodded, continuing his inspection. His engineer's mind cataloged each modification, assessing its impact on combat effectiveness, maintenance requirements, and crew operations. The Firefly was an impressive achievement, but clearly a stopgap solution born of desperate necessity rather than optimal design. Major Reynolds arrived with the technical manuals. Jack introduced the American mechanics to their British counterparts and suggested they work together through the maintenance procedures. With the immediate tension diffused, he pulled Reynolds aside. I need to meet the crew that will operate this Firefly in tomorrow's trials, and I want to observe the Easy 8 maintenance procedures as well. Reynolds nodded. The Easy 8 crew is in the mess hall. Firefly crew is scheduled to arrive within the hour. In the mess hall, Jack found Sergeant Rizzo sharing a table with 3 other tankers. The driver stood as Jack approached. Captain Steele, sir, allow me to introduce the rest of our crew for tomorrow's Easy 8 trials. Jack sat with the men, studying them as Rizzo made introductions. Each represented a different facet of America. Corporal Sam Doc Williams, the bowgunner, was a slender man with thoughtful eyes and steady hands. Before the war, he had been in his 2nd year of medical school at Johns Hopkins. My brother was at Pearl Harbor, Williams explained quietly, USS Arizona. After that, I couldn't stay in school while others fought. Private Thomas Kidd Johnson was barely 19, with the lanky frame and sunburned face of a farm boy from Kansas. As loader, his long reach and strong back would be valuable assets. Grew up throwing hay bales, sir, Johnson said with a shy smile. Figure loading shells can't be much harder. Sergeant Frank Eagle Eye Martinez, the gunner, was a compact man with the weathered features of someone who had spent his life outdoors. Before the war, he had worked as a hunting guide in Arizona. Best shot in the 6th Armored, Rizzo boasted on his behalf. Can hit a playing card at 100 yards with his M1. Martinez shrugged modestly. Hunting jackrabbits teaches you to lead a target. Hunting Germans isn't so different. Jack noted the easy camaraderie among the men. Despite their diverse backgrounds, they had formed the tight bond that characterized effective tank crews. The confined space of a Sherman forced intimacy. Men learned to anticipate each other's movements, to communicate with minimal words, to trust their lives to one another's skills. "Tell me about your experiences with the standard Sherman," Jack prompted. The mood darkened perceptibly. "Lost 2 tanks in North Africa," Rizzo said. "First one took a hit from an 88, went up like a torch. Johnson and I were the only survivors. Second one threw a track under fire. We were lucky the Germans were bad shots that day." Williams leaned forward. "The Sherman is fast and reliable when it runs, but against Panthers or Tigers, it's suicide unless you can flank them, and they don't always let you flank them." Martinez nodded in agreement. "Our 75mm gun is fine against earlier Panzer models or for infantry support. Against heavy German armor, it's like throwing rocks at a rhinoceros." Jack listened intently, hearing echoes of Robert's last letter in their experiences. These men had faced the same challenges, the same deadly arithmetic of combat against superior German tanks. "And your impressions of the Easy 8 from yesterday's trials?" The mood lightened immediately. "Night and day difference in handling," Rizzo enthused. "The HVSS suspension absorbs impacts that would throw the standard Sherman off course. Wider tracks give better flotation in soft ground. It corners like it's on rails. The 76mm has much better penetration," Martinez added. "I could punch through targets that would have bounced shells from a 75mm. The optics are improved too. Better magnification, clearer sight picture." Williams was more measured. "It's still undergunned compared to a Panther, let alone a Tiger, but it gives us a fighting chance we didn't have before." Johnson, the youngest and least experienced, summed it up simply. "It feels safer, sir." Jack made mental notes, impressed by the crew's technical understanding and practical assessment. These weren't just drivers and gunners. They were thinking warriors who understood their equipment's capabilities and limitations. As the conversation continued, Jack learned more about each man. Rizzo had been an auto mechanic in the Bronx, specializing in transmission work on luxury cars. His mechanical aptitude had made him a natural choice for driver training. Williams had joined expecting to serve in a medical unit, but had been reassigned to tanks due to personnel shortages. Johnson was the son of wheat farmers, the youngest of 5 brothers, all serving in different branches. Martinez had enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, one of the first Hispanic Americans from his town to volunteer. Their stories were America's story, a diverse nation unified by common purpose. Jack thought of his own son, who had served with men like these, who had died alongside them in the North African desert. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Firefly crew, a mix of American and British personnel assigned to evaluate the British modification. Their leader was a weathered British sergeant named Jenkins, who had fought in the Desert Campaign. "Captain Steele?" Jenkins saluted crisply. "Sergeant Robert Jenkins, formerly 8th Armored Brigade, now attached to your evaluation unit." Jack returned the salute. "Sergeant, the 8th Armored? Did you know Captain Douglas Wilson?" Jenkins' face registered surprise. "Wilson, yes, sir. Served with him at El Alamein. Good officer. How do you know him?" "He wrote to me about my son. They fought together." Understanding dawned in Jenkins' eyes. "You're Robert Steele's father. I've heard about you, sir. Your son saved Wilson's crew when their tank was disabled." The mess hall had gone quiet. American and British tankers alike recognized the weight of the moment, a connection across time and distance, forged in the crucible of shared sacrifice. "I'd like to hear more about that action, if you were there," Jack said quietly. Jenkins nodded. "Over a proper cup of tea, sir, if you'll permit me." As the British crew settled in with their American counterparts, Jack observed the initial awkwardness giving way to professional curiosity. Tankers on both sides had faced the same German predators. They shared the same vulnerabilities, the same fears, the same determination to survive. Later that evening, Jack and Sergeant Jenkins sat in the Officers' Club, a requisitioned country pub that maintained some of its pre-war charm despite military occupation. "It was near Kidney Ridge," Jenkins began, warming his hands around a teacup. "July 42, bloody hot, dust everywhere. We'd been engaging elements of the 15th Panzer Division all morning. Captain Wilson's tank took a hit that disabled the track. Not fatal, but they couldn't move. Then the Tigers appeared." Jenkins paused, his weathered face grim with memory. "3 of them, advancing in formation. Wilson's tank was a sitting duck. That's when your son's Sherman appeared. He positioned between Wilson's tank and the Tigers, laying smoke, giving Wilson's crew time to evacuate. And then Jack prompted, though he already knew the answer. The lead Tiger got a clean shot. Your son's tank took a direct hit. Ammunition cooked off. No survivors. Jenkins met Jack's gaze. But Wilson's entire crew made it out. 5 men who went home to their families because of what your son did. Jack nodded silently, absorbing the confirmation of what he had pieced together from Wilson's letter and the official reports. Robert had died as he had lived with courage and concern for others. That's why the Firefly matters, sir, Jenkins continued. With a 17-pounder, your son could have engaged those tigers effectively from beyond their optimal range. Might have changed the outcome entirely. Or the Easy-8's mobility might have allowed a successful flanking maneuver. Jack countered, maintaining his objectivity despite the emotional weight of the conversation. Jenkins conceded the point with a slight nod. Perhaps. Both represent significant improvements. The question is, which saves more lives in the conditions we'll face in France? They talked late into the night, comparing experiences and perspectives. Jenkins had seen the Firefly in early trials, had witnessed its devastating effect on German armor. But he had also experienced its limitations, the slower rate of fire, the maintenance challenges, the crew fatigue in prolonged operations. No perfect answer, is there? Jenkins said finally. There rarely is in engineering, Jack replied. Every design is a series of compromises. The art is in choosing the right compromises for the conditions you expect to face. As they parted, Jenkins hesitated, then reached into his pocket. Nearly forgot. When I heard you were here, I brought this. He handed Jack a worn photograph. Taken about a week before El Alamein. That's your son on the left, Wilson in the middle, me on the right. Jack stared at the image. 3 young men stood beside a Sherman tank, squinting in the desert sun, arms around each other's shoulders. Robert looked thin but strong, his face darkened by sun and sand, his smile familiar despite the harsh conditions. Keep it, Jenkins said. Got another copy. Jack carefully tucked the photograph into his breast pocket. Thank you, Sergeant. Back in his quarters, Jack removed Robert's watch and the newly acquired photograph, placing them side by side on his desk. The tangible connections to his son strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about tactical advantages or production efficiencies. It was about the men who would fight and possibly die in these machines. He picked up his pen and began to write, not the official evaluation Harrison expected, but a letter to General Williams at the Pentagon. In clear, precise language, Jack outlined his emerging conclusion. Neither the Firefly nor the Easy-8 alone represented the optimal solution. The best approach would be a coordinated deployment of both variants, each playing to its strengths while compensated for by the other's capabilities. It was an unorthodox recommendation, one that would complicate production and supply chains, but it would save lives. And ultimately, that was the only metric that truly mattered. As Jack wrote deep into the night, the photograph of his son watched over him. In Robert's smile, Jack found the strength to challenge conventional wisdom, to fight not just for the memory of one fallen soldier, but for the thousands who would soon cross the channel to face Germany's armored might. The easy path was to choose one variant over the other, to satisfy the demands of production efficiency and doctrinal simplicity. The right path was more complex, more challenging, but potentially transformative. Like the young men in the photograph, Jack would face his challenge head-on, with courage and conviction, regardless of the personal cost. Outside his window, a convoy of trucks rumbled past carrying supplies for the build-up to the invasion. The greatest amphibious operation in military history would soon begin, and with it, thousands of American tankers would face the most formidable armored force the world had ever seen. Jack sealed the letter to General Williams, knowing it might end his career, but unable to remain silent when lives hung in the balance. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same courage his son had shown on that dusty battlefield in North Africa. It was the only tribute worthy of Robert's sacrifice. Morning fog shrouded the assembled tanks, transforming them into ghostly silhouettes. Captain Jack Steele stood before the newly designated Task Force 506, his breath visible in the damp English air. 8 tanks waited in formation, standard Shermans, British Fireflies with their distinctive long guns, and American Easy-8s with their improved suspensions. Colonel Harrison approached, clipboard in hand. Your recommendation for integrated deployment of both variants rather than selecting one for mass production is unorthodox, Captain. But tactically sound, Colonel. That remains to be seen. Harrison's mouth tightened. The War Department prefers standardization for logistical efficiency. The enemy doesn't care about our logistical preferences, sir. You've been granted 1 week to prove your theory. Task Force 506 will conduct comprehensive field exercises simulating combat conditions in France. As Harrison departed, Jack surveyed the assembled tanks, calculating possibilities. American and British tankers mingled with cautious professional courtesy, veterans of North Africa alongside fresh replacements who had never faced German armor. Gentlemen, Jack addressed them, for the next week we will conduct the most comprehensive evaluation of Sherman variants ever attempted. The results will directly impact how we fight when we cross into France. He gestured to the assembled vehicles. Each crew will rotate through all variants, Standard Sherman, Firefly, and Easy 8. You will be evaluated on mobility, firepower, and tactical effectiveness. Sergeant Rizzo raised his hand. Sir, we've barely had time to familiarize ourselves with one variant. Now we're supposed to master all three? That's precisely the point, Sergeant. In combat, you may need to operate whatever vehicle is available. Adaptability will keep you alive. Jack moved to a large map posted nearby. Our training area replicates terrain we'll encounter in France. Open fields similar to Normandy countryside. Forested areas with limited visibility, simulated urban environments with narrow streets. Throughout the morning, Jack observed each crew put their tanks through mobility trials. The differences were immediately apparent. The Standard Sherman struggled in muddy conditions. The Easy 8, with its improved suspension and wider tracks, maintained speed and stability across challenging terrain. The Firefly, front-heavy due to its massive gun, required skillful handling, especially on slopes. By midday, the crew switched vehicles and repeated the exercises. Jack noted how quickly the men adapted, developing a comprehensive understanding of each Sherman variant's characteristics. Lieutenant Robert Thompson approached as Jack made notes on performance. Captain Steele, Lieutenant Thompson, General Harmon's staff. What brings the General's staff to our little demonstration? Thompson lowered his voice. Unofficial interest, sir. General Harmon has concerns about our armor capabilities against German heavies. Later, Jack would learn Thompson was more than a staff officer. He was the son of Senator Thompson, chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee, whose district included several major tank component manufacturers with vested interests in standardized production. The afternoon session focused on firepower effectiveness. Each tank variant engaged targets at varying distances, from close-range infantry simulations to long-range armored targets. The results confirmed what specifications had indicated. The Firefly dominated at extended ranges against armored targets, while the Easy 8 provided better all-around performance with acceptable anti-armor capability. As darkness fell, Jack returned to his quarters to compile observations. He was surprised to find Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood waiting, smoking his pipe. Your integrated approach performed admirably today, Blackwood observed. The coordination between variants was most effective. Thank you, Colonel. Just a friendly warning. Blackwood tapped his pipe against his palm. Your evaluation has attracted attention beyond Colonel Harrison. There are significant production contracts at stake, political considerations on both sides of the Atlantic. My only concern is the survival of our tank crews. Admirable, but perhaps naive. Blackwood's expression softened. I served with your son, you know, not directly, but our units operated together in Tunisia. He had your determination. After Blackwood departed, a knock interrupted Jack's thoughts. Private Johnson appeared in the doorway. There's a problem with one of the Fireflies. Thought you'd want to know right away. Jack followed Johnson to the maintenance hangar, where a Firefly sat with its turret access panels removed. A team of mechanics worked under portable lights, their expressions grim. Hydraulic failure in the turret traverse system, the chief mechanic explained. Complete seizure during the last exercise would have left the tank vulnerable in combat. Jack examined the exposed hydraulic system. His engineer's eye immediately spotted the problem. The pressure relief valve is undersized for the load. The 17-pounder puts more strain on the traverse system than the original design accounted for. How long to repair? 6 hours minimum, sir. We'll be working through the night. I'll stay and assist. Jack removed his officer's jacket and rolled up his sleeves. This is as much an engineering problem as a maintenance issue. For the next several hours, Jack worked alongside the mechanics, his hands blackened with grease, his mind fully engaged with the technical challenge. This was familiar territory, the practical problem-solving that had defined his civilian career. Around midnight, Lieutenant Peterson appeared with coffee and sandwiches. Colonel Harrison was asking about your absence from the officers' mess. Tell him I'm getting a hands-on education in Firefly maintenance requirements. There's something else, sir. Peterson lowered his voice. General Hoffman will be observing tomorrow's exercises. Jack paused, coffee mug halfway to his lips. Hoffman, the Ordnance Department chief? Yes, sir. Apparently your evaluation has attracted Pentagon attention. The stakes continued to rise. If the Ordnance chief was personally observing, the evaluation had implications far beyond what Harrison had initially indicated. By 4 a.m., the repair was complete. Jack supervised the final testing, watching as the turret smoothly traversed through its full range of motion. Couldn't have done it without your expertise, sir, the chief mechanic admitted. Having someone who understands both the engineering principles and the combat requirements made all the difference. 2 hours later, freshly uniformed despite a sleepless night, Jack stood before the assembled task force. Today we move beyond individual vehicle assessment to coordinated operations. You've experienced the strengths and limitations of each variant. Now we'll see how they function together as an integrated force. He outlined the day's scenario. Advance through varied terrain against simulated enemy positions, including mock-ups of German armor. The force would be divided into 4 platoons, each containing 1 Firefly and 1 EZ-8 operating as a team. The EZ-8 will take point, using its superior mobility to secure advantageous positions. The Firefly will provide overwatch, engaging armored targets from maximum effective range. As Jack prepared to mount his command tank, Sergeant Jenkins approached, his expression troubled. A word, sir? They stepped aside for privacy. Jenkins spoke in a low voice. There's talk among the British contingent about political pressure regarding the evaluation. Some believe the outcome has already been determined, favoring the EZ-8 regardless of performance. Jack frowned. Source of this information? Colonel Blackwood received a telegram from the War Office this morning. Apparently, the American production decision is being presented as final, with the evaluation merely a formality. Thank you, Sergeant. Focus on the exercises. Let me worry about the politics. Jack climbed into the commander's hatch of his EZ-8, determination hardening his resolve. Politics and production contracts wouldn't determine his recommendation. Performance would. Data would. The lives of tank crews would. Chapter 6. Trial by Fire. All units, this is Steel 6. Commence advance according to plan. Maintain tactical discipline and inter-vehicle communication. Task Force 506 moved out, traversing the training ground in formation. Jack stood in the turret, observing through binoculars. The improved suspension of his EZ-8 was immediately apparent, absorbing uneven terrain with minimal crew disruption. Ahead, the first simulated obstacle appeared, a narrow stream crossing bordered by steep banks. The EZ-8s navigated the crossing smoothly, their wider tracks providing better traction on the muddy approach. The Fireflies followed, more cautiously but successfully. The force continued through increasingly challenging terrain. A wooded area with limited visibility tested crew coordination. Then a simulated village with narrow streets that created potential ambush points. Throughout, Jack noted the emerging tactical dynamics. The EZ-8s excelled in maneuver and rapid engagement of multiple targets. The Fireflies provided standoff capability, their powerful guns eliminating hardened targets from beyond return fire range. When they encountered the first simulated Panther, the integrated approach proved its value. The EZ-8 platoons identified the threat but held their fire, calling in Firefly support. The 17-pounder guns engaged from maximum range, scoring simulated kills before the target could effectively return fire. By midday, rain began to fall. Visibility decreased, and the already soft ground became treacherous. In these conditions, the mobility advantage of the EZ-8 became even more pronounced. The Fireflies struggled on muddier slopes, requiring more careful route selection. Steel 6 to all units, advance to final objective. Expect simulated armor in defensive positions. The task force crested a ridge, revealing the final scenario, a mock German defensive line with multiple armored vehicles in anti-tank positions. Jack keyed his radio. All units deploy according to plan. EZ-8 platoons to flanking positions. Firefly units maintain overwatch from ridge positions. The force executed the maneuver smoothly, each variant leveraging its strengths. The EZ-8s used their mobility to secure advantageous angles. The Fireflies, stabilized on the ridge, provided long-range fire support. As the exercise reached its climax, Jack's attention was drawn to a Firefly on the eastern flank. Something was wrong. The tank had stopped advancing, its turret motionless. Steel 6 to Firefly 4, report status. No response. Jack redirected his EZ-8 toward the stalled vehicle. As he approached, he saw crew members emerging from the hatches, urgency in their movements. "Engine fire!" someone shouted. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment. Jack leapt from the turret, racing to assess the situation. The crew had deployed fire extinguishers, but flames persisted, feeding on leaking fuel and oil. "What happened?" Jack demanded of the tank commander, a British lieutenant named Collins. "Transmission seized, sir. Engine over-rev trying to climb the slope. Caught fire almost immediately." The Firefly, with its front-heavy design, had been pushing its power plant to the limit. The added weight of the 17-pounder gun strained components designed for a lighter turret. "Everyone clear the area," Jack ordered. Fuel tanks could rupture. After several tense minutes, they managed to extinguish the flames, but the damage was extensive. The Firefly was combat ineffective. "Steel 6 to all units. Exercise terminated. Return to base." When they returned, the observing officers were already discussing the exercise results. Jack could see animated conversations between Harrison, Hoffman, and other senior commanders. "Captain Steele," Harrison called, "a word about today's demonstration." Jack braced for criticism, but Harrison's expression was contemplative. "Your integrated tactical approach showed promise," Harrison admitted. "The coordination between variants was effective against simulated armor. But the Firefly failure raises serious concerns about reliability." "Every vehicle has reliability thresholds, Colonel," Jack responded. "The key is understanding those limitations and planning accordingly." General Hoffman joined them, his weathered face unreadable. "Interesting approach, Captain. Not what the production planners want to hear, but tactically sound based on today's demonstration." He studied Jack with piercing blue eyes. "Your background gives you unique perspective. Not many officers understand both engineering limitations and tactical requirements." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. Your evaluation challenges our existing procurement strategy. That makes you either very brave or very foolish." As the officers dispersed, Major Reynolds approached, his expression troubled. "Jack, there's something you should know. The Firefly failure may not have been entirely mechanical." Jack frowned. "Explain." "One of the British mechanics found evidence of tampering. Someone modified the transmission governor enough to cause progressive failure under stress." "Sabotage?" Jack felt cold anger rising. Who would benefit from discrediting the Firefly? "Draw your own conclusions. There are significant American production contracts riding on the EZ-8 selection, and not everyone appreciates your integrated approach." The implications were disturbing. If someone was willing to sabotage the evaluation, the stakes were even higher than Jack had realized. Not just tactical doctrine or production contracts, but powerful interests determined to maintain the status quo regardless of combat effectiveness. "Keep this between us for now," Jack instructed. "Increase security on all vehicles. Double-check everything before tomorrow's exercises." Chapter 7, The Price of Innovation. Morning briefing brought grim news. Overnight intelligence reported accelerated German armor deployments along the projected invasion beaches. Not just Panthers and Tigers, but confirmed sightings of the newer Tiger II with frontal armor exceeding 150 millimeters in thickness. "These reports change the strategic calculus," Jack told the assembled officers. "Standard Shermans will be completely outmatched by these German heavies, even at extreme ranges." Colonel Harrison frowned at the reconnaissance photographs. "The invasion plans are fixed, Captain. We don't have time to revolutionize our armored doctrine before D-Day." "All the more reason to implement the integrated approach immediately," Jack countered. "The Firefly's 17-pounder is our only tank gun capable of reliably penetrating Tiger II armor beyond point-blank range." General Hoffman studied the intelligence assessment. "Production realities can't be ignored, Steele. We have thousands of standard Shermans already committed to the invasion. Conversion to Firefly specifications would require time we simply don't have." "Not all units would require conversion, sir. Strategic deployment of Firefly-equipped platoons alongside standard Sherman and EZ-8 units could provide the necessary anti-armor capability where most critically needed." The debate continued, with staff officers contributing logistical perspectives and intelligence analysts offering projections of expected German armor distribution. Throughout, Jack noted the tension between tactical requirements and production limitations. "Today's final exercise will simulate conditions we expect to encounter during the invasion," Harrison announced. "Based on the new intelligence, we'll incorporate simulated Tiger II positions in the defense force. As Jack departed the command center, Major Reynolds fell into step beside him. Lieutenant Thompson was seen making encrypted calls to Washington last night. And those civilian observers? They're not just production representatives. At least two are connected to major defense contractors with Sherman component contracts. Jack absorbed this grimly. The evaluation had become a nexus of competing interests: production efficiency versus combat effectiveness, standardization versus specialization, economic priorities versus tactical requirements. None of that changes my recommendation, Jack said. The data speaks for itself. The integrated approach demonstrably improves combat effectiveness and projected survival rates. At the motor pool, Jack found tank crews conducting final preparations. The atmosphere was focused, each man understanding the day's significance. This was a rehearsal for battles they would soon face across the channel. Jack approached Sergeant Rizzo, who was supervising final adjustments to his Easy-8's track tension. "How's she running, Sergeant?" "Like a dream, sir," Rizzo replied, patting the hull affectionately. "The mechanics worked through the night checking every component. She's combat ready." "And the crew?" "Motivated, sir. Yesterday's performance convinced everyone the integrated approach works. Having those fireflies watching our backs makes all the difference to morale." Jack continued his inspection, speaking briefly with each crew. The British tankers expressed particular pride in the Firefly's performance, while acknowledging its limitations. The American crews praised the Easy-8's all-around capabilities while recognizing its inferior penetration power against heavy armor. Most tellingly, both groups emphasized the same conclusion. Together, the variants created capabilities neither possessed alone. At the observation post, the audience for the final demonstration had grown substantially. General Hoffman had been joined by additional senior officers from both American and British commands. The civilian contingent had expanded as well, now including individuals Jack recognized from production planning authorities. "Steel 6 to all units. Commence Operation Anvil according to briefed plan. Maintain tactical discipline and inter-vehicle communication." The task force moved out in formation. Jack stood in the commander's position, binoculars scanning the terrain ahead. The improved weather conditions provided excellent visibility, allowing precise coordination between dispersed units. When they encountered the first simulated infantry position, the Easy-8s demonstrated their versatility, engaging with machine guns and high-explosive rounds while maintaining movement. The Fireflies provided overwatch. Their powerful main guns held in reserve for armored threats. "Steel 6 to all units, approaching phase line Bravo. Intelligence indicates armored elements beyond the ridgeline. Prepare for engagement." The formation adjusted, with Easy-8s taking flanking positions while Fireflies established fire bases on elevated ground. The coordination between elements had become almost instinctive after days of combined operations. As the force crested the ridge, they encountered the first simulated Tiger II, a target hulk positioned at approximately 1,200 yards. At this range, the standard Sherman's 75mm gun would be completely ineffective against such heavily armored opposition. "Firefly 2, target identified, permission to engage." Granted, all Firefly elements engage armored targets by priority. The 17-pounder guns opened fire, their distinctive reports echoing across the training ground. Through his binoculars, Jack observed the impacts on the target vehicles, precision hits that would have penetrated the formidable armor of actual Tiger IIs. As the scenario progressed, the task force encountered more complex challenges: a simulated counterattack by German armor, including targets representing both Panthers and Tiger IIs approaching from multiple directions. Here, the integrated approach demonstrated its greatest value, with Fireflies engaging the heaviest threats, while Easy-8s maintained a mobile defense against lighter elements. "Steel 6 to all units. Consolidate position and prepare for final assault on primary objective." The force regrouped, adjusting formation for the culminating phase. Thus far, the integrated approach had performed exactly as Jack had projected, with complementary capabilities creating tactical options unavailable to homogeneous units. As they prepared for the final assault, however, disaster struck. One of the Fireflies reported a catastrophic engine failure, with smoke billowing from the engine compartment. Initial reports indicated fuel system contamination similar to the attempted sabotage discovered the previous night. Jack ordered a tactical adjustment, redistributing the remaining forces to compensate for the lost Firefly. Despite this setback, the task force completed the exercise successfully, securing the final objective with simulated casualties significantly below doctrinal expectations. The after-action review was conducted with both crew commanders and senior observers present. Jack presented the compiled data from all exercises, highlighting the statistical improvements in combat effectiveness and projected survival rates with the integrated approach. The evidence is conclusive, Jack stated, indicating performance charts. Integrated forces combining Firefly and EZ-8 variants demonstrated 37% higher effectiveness against armored targets and 22% lower projected casualties compared to homogeneous units of either variant. General Hoffman nodded thoughtfully. The tactical advantages are evident, Captain, but the logistical implications cannot be dismissed. Two distinct ammunition types, specialized maintenance requirements, complicated training protocols. With respect, General, those challenges pale compared to the alternative. American tankers facing superior German armor without adequate countermeasures. Colonel Harrison interjected. Production authorities estimate converting even 25% of planned Sherman production to Firefly specifications would delay deployment by at least 2 months. The invasion timeline doesn't allow such flexibility. Then we adapt accordingly, Jack countered. Convert existing vehicles already in theater. Prioritize deployment to units expected to face the heaviest German armor concentrations. As the formal review concluded, General Hoffman approached Jack privately. Your evaluation has been comprehensive and persuasive, Captain. I'll forward your recommendations to General Eisenhower's staff for consideration. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. The production realities remain significant obstacles, and certain political interests are heavily invested in standardized manufacturing approaches. Hoffman studied him with experienced eyes. You've made powerful enemies these past days, Steele. Men who view tanks as contracts rather than combat vehicles. Be prepared for resistance. I'm prepared to defend my findings regardless of opposition, General. The data speaks for itself. Later that evening, Jack was summoned to Harrison's office. He found the colonel reviewing the final exercise reports, his expression thoughtful. Your integrated approach performed well today, Steele. Even I must admit the tactical advantages were evident. Thank you, sir. But I've received communications from Ordnance Department headquarters. The production decision has essentially been made. The EZ-8 will be our standardized upgrade path, with limited Firefly conversions handled by the British for their own units. Jack felt a surge of frustration. Before even reviewing our evaluation results, production timelines don't allow for protracted deliberation. Tooling changes must be initiated immediately to meet invasion requirements. Harrison sighed. It's not ideal, Captain, but it's the reality we face. With respect, sir, that decision condemns American tank crews to face superior German armor without adequate countermeasures. The 76mm guns simply cannot reliably penetrate Tiger II frontal armor beyond point-blank range. I understand your concern, but the decision balances tactical requirements against production realities. We cannot optimize for every battlefield scenario. Jack contained his anger with effort. We're not discussing abstract optimization, Colonel. We're talking about American lives. Men who will die because we prioritize production convenience over combat effectiveness. Harrison's expression hardened. That's enough, Captain. You've conducted your evaluation admirably, but the strategic decisions lie with higher authorities. Jack departed, frustration giving way to determination. The decision might have been predetermined, but he wasn't finished. Not while alternatives remained unexplored. Chapter 8. The Dual Challenge. A knock interrupted Jack's thoughts as he reviewed his compiled data, searching for compelling evidence that could not be easily dismissed. He opened the door to find Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood waiting, an uncharacteristic urgency in his manner. May I come in, Captain? There's a matter of some importance we should discuss. Jack admitted the British officer, noting his unusually serious expression. I've received communication from General Montgomery's staff, Blackwood began without preamble. Your evaluation results have attracted significant attention at SHAEF headquarters. The general is particularly interested in your integrated approach. Harrison informed me the production decision has already been made. Standard conversion to EZ-8 specifications, with limited Firefly production for British units only. Indeed, that's the official position from your Ordnance Department. Blackwood produced a folder from his briefcase. However, General Montgomery believes an alternative arrangement might be possible, one that achieves your tactical objectives without disrupting American production priorities. Jack accepted the folder, finding detailed production projections and deployment scenarios inside. What exactly are you proposing, Colonel? A joint Anglo-American initiative. Your factories continue mass-producing the Easy-8 according to plan. Meanwhile, we establish conversion facilities in England to modify a percentage of those tanks to Firefly specifications before deployment to combat units. Jack studied the proposal with growing interest. This bypasses the production obstacles without sacrificing the tactical advantages of the integrated approach. Precisely. British factories are already converting Sherman tanks under Lend-Lease arrangements. Expanding that program to include newly produced Easy-8s would require minimal additional resources. And General Montgomery supports this approach? Enthusiastically. He's seen the reports from North Africa and Italy. British tankers face the same limitations against German heavy armor that your son encountered. Blackwood's expression softened. This isn't just about production efficiency or national pride, Captain. It's about giving our men the best possible chance of survival. Jack reviewed the document with growing appreciation for the thoroughness of the proposal. The British had anticipated the logistical objections and developed practical countermeasures. This might actually work, Colonel. It must work, Captain. The alternative is unacceptable. The following morning brought unexpected developments. Jack was summoned to General Hoffman's temporary headquarters, arriving to find the ordnance chief engaged in heated discussion with Colonel Harrison and several staff officers. Maps of the French coast covered the conference table, alongside production schedules and deployment projections. Captain Steele, join us, Hoffman directed. We've received updated intelligence that changes our strategic calculations significantly. Jack studied the newly marked maps. Increased German armor deployments along the invasion beaches? Worse, confirmed presence of Tiger II units in greater numbers than previously estimated, along with new anti-tank emplacements utilizing the 88 gun. Hoffman indicated the projected landing zones. Our armored units will face superior enemy tanks from the moment they move inland. The implication was clear. Standard Shermans, even with the 76mm upgrade of the Easy-8, would be at a severe disadvantage against such opposition. Only the Firefly's 17-pounder offered reliable penetration capability against the heaviest German armor. Your evaluation results have assumed new urgency, Captain, Hoffman continued. General Eisenhower's staff has requested immediate recommendations for addressing this armored imbalance before the invasion launches. Jack seized the opportunity. Sir, I believe the Anglo-American conversion proposal represents our most viable option. British facilities can modify a percentage of our Sherman production to Firefly specifications without disrupting our manufacturing timelines. Harrison frowned. You've discussed this with Colonel Blackwood? Yes, sir. At General Montgomery's direction, he presented a detailed proposal for joint conversion operations using British facilities and technical expertise. Hoffman studied Jack thoughtfully. You failed to mention this during yesterday's debriefing, Captain. The proposal wasn't fully developed until last night, sir, and given Colonel Harrison's indication that the production decision had already been made, I believed additional channels might be necessary. A tense silence followed, broken eventually by Hoffman's dry chuckle. Resourceful, Captain. Potentially insubordinate, but resourceful. He turned to Harrison. The strategic situation demands flexibility, Colonel. If the British are offering resources to enhance our capabilities without disrupting our production priorities, we would be fools to refuse. The meeting continued for hours, with staff officers detailing implementation requirements and potential obstacles. Throughout, Jack presented the technical and tactical evidence from his evaluation, emphasizing the projected improvements in combat effectiveness and crew survival rates. By midday, a consensus had emerged. The Anglo-American conversion program would proceed on a limited scale, with approximately 25% of Sherman tanks deployed to frontline armored divisions modified to Firefly specifications. The remaining tanks would receive the Easy-8 upgrades as originally planned. This represents a reasonable compromise between tactical requirements and production realities, Hoffman concluded. Captain Steele, you'll coordinate with Colonel Blackwood to develop detailed implementation protocols. Jack experienced a complex mixture of emotions. The integrated approach he had championed would be implemented, though on a more limited scale than he had initially recommended. American tank crews would have access to the Firefly's superior anti-armor capability, improving their chances against the formidable German heavy tanks. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a significant improvement over the standardized approach originally planned. That afternoon, Jack met with Colonel Blackwood to begin planning the conversion program implementation. They worked through technical and logistical details, identifying potential bottlenecks, and developing mitigation strategies. The integration of British maintenance units with American armored divisions would require careful coordination, as would the ammunition supply chain for the 17-pounder guns. By evening, they had developed a comprehensive implementation plan. It represented a genuine Anglo-American collaboration, leveraging the strengths of both nations to address a critical capability gap before the invasion. The following morning brought news that the first Sherman tanks had already been directed to the British conversion facilities. Jack found himself appointed as technical liaison to the conversion program, responsible for ensuring the modified tanks met both British and American combat requirements. "You've achieved something remarkable, Captain," General Hoffman told him during their final meeting. "Changed established doctrine through sheer persuasive evidence and stubborn determination." "The evidence spoke for itself, sir. Rarely does evidence alone prevail against entrenched interests, Steele. Your persistence made the difference." Hoffman studied him thoughtfully. "What are your plans after the conversion program is implemented?" "I assumed I would return to my original assignment with the 6th Armored, sir. I have a different proposition. General Patton has requested you join his staff as technical advisor on armored operations. Your experience with both variants and understanding of their optimal tactical employment would be invaluable during the invasion." Jack felt a surge of unexpected emotion. George Patton commanded the Third Army, scheduled to play a crucial role in the post-invasion breakout. The assignment represented both recognition of his expertise and an opportunity to directly influence armored operations at the highest level. "I would be honored, sir." That evening, Jack packed his belongings in preparation for transfer to Patton's headquarters. As he organized his papers, he came across Robert's last letter, now worn from frequent handling. The words that had driven him to join the Army and fight for better equipment had become a touchstone, a reminder of purpose when political and production obstacles seemed insurmountable. He carefully placed the letter in his breast pocket, alongside the photograph showing Robert with his tank crew in North Africa. These connections to his son would accompany him to his new assignment, continuing to inspire his efforts to protect American tankers from the fate Robert had suffered. Jack placed Robert's watch on his bedside table, its steady ticking a reminder of both loss and purpose. His son's death had set him on this path, driven him to fight production expediency and political obstacles in pursuit of better equipment for American tankers. The conversion program represented progress, though not complete victory. 25% of Sherman tanks would receive the Firefly's powerful 17-pounder gun, giving American armored units the capability to engage German heavy tanks effectively. The remaining tanks, upgraded to EZ-8 specifications, would provide the mobility and versatility needed for the varied combat environments of the European campaign. It wasn't the ideal solution Jack had initially recommended, but it was a significant improvement over the standardized approach originally planned. More importantly, it established a precedent for technical adaptation based on combat requirements rather than production convenience. As sleep approached, Jack found comfort in this accomplishment. Robert's sacrifice had not been in vain. The lessons learned from his death had driven improvements that would save other young men from a similar fate. It wasn't resurrection, but it was redemption of a sort, a father's tribute to his fallen son. Rain pounded against the canvas tent where Captain Jack Steele hunched over maps of the Normandy coastline. 3 weeks had passed since his appointment to General Patton's staff. The Anglo-American tank conversion program proceeded at remarkable speed, with the first Firefly converted Shermans already assigned to frontline units preparing for the invasion. "Your integrated deployment concept has attracted considerable attention, now, Captain," General Patton said, entering the tent with characteristic energy. The legendary tank commander moved with purpose, his polished boots gleaming despite the muddy conditions outside. "Thank you, sir. The latest intelligence on German armored deployments makes it even more critical." Patton studied the marked maps showing projected concentrations of Tiger and Panther tanks along the invasion route. The problem isn't just their superior armor and firepower, it's their tactical doctrine. German heavy tank battalions operate as concentrated forces, not dispersed among infantry like our deployments. Jack nodded, "Which is why I've developed this modified approach." He unrolled a fresh tactical diagram. "I call it the Wolfpack strategy." Patton leaned forward, eyes sharp with interest. "Explain." "Instead of evenly distributing our Firefly-equipped Shermans across all units, we concentrate them in specialized anti-tank platoons attached to each battalion. 4 tanks per platoon, 2 Fireflies and 2 Easy 8s operating as integrated teams. The Fireflies being your alpha wolves, Patton observed, quickly grasping the concept. Exactly, sir. Alpha wolves engage enemy heavy armor from maximum range with their 17-pounders. The Easy 8s, the beta wolves, provide protection against infantry attacks and flanking maneuvers. Together, they hunt the German heavies instead of merely reacting to them. Patton traced the deployment pattern on the map. You're proposing we adopt a hunter strategy rather than our typical defensive posture against German armor. German heavy tanks are formidable but not invulnerable. Their main weakness is reduced mobility and slower turret traverse. Wolf packs can exploit these limitations through coordinated action. Fireflies pinning the target with long-range fire, while Easy 8s maneuver for flank shots. The general's eyes gleamed. Aggressive, coordinated, utilizing specialized strengths. He slapped the map decisively. It suits American temperament better than playing defensive chess with technically superior opponents. A messenger arrived with an urgent dispatch. Patton read it quickly, his expression darkening. Intelligence confirms the 21st Panzer Division has been reinforced with a company of Tiger IIs. They're positioned directly in our planned breakout corridor. Jack studied the updated positions. The German deployment represented a significant threat to the post-invasion plans. Standard Shermans would be hopelessly outmatched against such concentrated heavy armor. This will be the first real test of your Wolfpack concept, Captain, Patton said. I'm assigning you temporary field command of the 761st Tank Battalion for the operation. Their first shipment of converted Fireflies arrived yesterday, 4 tanks, enough for 2 Wolfpack teams. Jack straightened, surprised by the field assignment. Sir, nobody understands this integrated approach better than you, Steele. The men need someone who believes in the concept and understands both variants' capabilities. Patton fixed him with an intense stare. Your son died because we sent inadequate equipment against superior German armor. Here's your chance to ensure other fathers don't receive the same telegram. 2 days later, Jack stood before the assembled officers and senior non-commissioned officers of the 761st Tank Battalion. Known as the Black Panthers, they were one of the few African-American armored units in the segregated U.S. Army, with a reputation for discipline and determined fighting spirit despite the prejudice they faced. Gentlemen, I'll be indirect, Jack began. Intelligence confirms we will face Tiger IIs and Panthers in our sector. These German heavies can penetrate our standard Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. Their frontal armor is largely impervious to our 75mm guns at any practical combat range. He paused, letting the sobering reality sink in before continuing. But we now have a countermeasure. The converted Firefly Shermans with British 17-pounder guns can penetrate Tiger II frontal armor at combat ranges. Combined with our Easy 8s in the Wolfpack formation, we have a fighting chance against the best German armor. Lieutenant Wilson, the battalion's operations officer, raised a hand. Sir, our men have barely had time to familiarize themselves with the Fireflies. The loading procedures and ballistic characteristics are significantly different from our standard guns. I understand the challenge, Lieutenant. That's why I'll personally work with each Firefly crew before the operation. We have 3 days to prepare. For the next 72 hours, Jack lived with the tank crews, supervising intensive training with the newly arrived Fireflies. He worked alongside the men in the confined turrets, demonstrating loading techniques, explaining the different ballistic characteristics of the 17-pounder, and helping them develop the crew coordination essential for effective operation. The key difference is recoil management, he explained to a group of gunners. The 17-pounder produces significantly more recoil force than you're accustomed to. You'll need to adjust your follow-through on each shot. Sergeant Davis, a veteran tank commander from Mississippi, voiced the concern many felt. With respect, Captain, can these modified tanks really take on Tigers? We've all heard stories from North Africa and Italy. Jack met the man's gaze directly. My son died in North Africa when his Sherman encountered Tigers. His standard 75mm gun couldn't penetrate their armor. The Firefly's 17-pounder changes that equation completely. He unfolded a technical diagram showing armor penetration data. This isn't theory or wishful thinking, Sergeant. These are empirical results from extensive testing. The 17-pounder will punch through Tiger II frontal armor at normal combat ranges. You'll still need skill and courage, but now you'll also have a fighting chance. By the final day of preparation, the Wolfpack teams had developed impressive coordination. During live fire exercises, the integrated Firefly and Easy 8 units demonstrated the tactical flexibility Jack had envisioned. Fireflies engaging armored targets from the standoff positions, while Easy 8s provided mobile defense and flanking capabilities. On the eve of the operation, General Patton returned to inspect the battalion. He observed the final rehearsal with careful attention, occasionally asking pointed questions about specific tactical movements. "Your Wolfpack concept has merit, Steele," he concluded as they watched the tanks return to their maintenance area. "But tomorrow will provide the real test. The 21st Panzer Division has some of the most experienced tank commanders in the German army. They won't be easily outmaneuvered." "No plan survives contact with the enemy intact, sir," Jack acknowledged. "But these men are well prepared, and for the first time, they have equipment that gives them a fighting chance against the best German armor." That night, unable to sleep, Jack walked among the assembled tanks. Maintenance crews worked by portable lights, making final adjustments and repairs. The distinctive long barrel of the Fireflies stood out among the more numerous standard Shermans and Easy 8s, physical embodiments of the integrated approach he had championed against institutional resistance. He paused beside one Firefly, where a crew member worked alone, adjusting the gun elevation mechanism by flashlight. It was Sergeant Davis, the initially skeptical tank commander. "Trouble with the elevation gearing, Sergeant?" Davis straightened, wiping grease from his hands. "Just fine-tuning, sir. Want her perfect for tomorrow." He patted the turret with unexpected affection. "She's growing on me. Different but impressive once you get used to her quirks." "Like any good partner," Jack observed with a smile. "My gunner's achieving consistent hits at 1,500 yards, sir. Never had that kind of confidence with the 75mm against armored targets." Davis hesitated. "I want to thank you for pushing to get us these weapons. Most officers wouldn't have bothered, especially not for—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Jack understood. Despite their proven combat record, the 761st still faced prejudice as an African-American unit. "Every American deserves the best equipment we can provide, Sergeant, and every father deserves to see his son come home." Dawn broke with ominous gray clouds hanging low over the French countryside. The operation would commence at Burroughs 700 hours, a coordinated attack to clear German armor from a strategic road junction controlling access to the breakout corridor. Intelligence indicated at least 4 Tiger IIs supported by Panthers and infantry. Jack assembled the Wolfpack commanders for a final briefing. "Remember your training. Fireflies engage from maximum effective range, focusing on heavy armor. Easy 8s protect their flanks and handle secondary targets. Communicate constantly. You succeed or fail as integrated teams, not individual tanks." At precisely 0700, the attack began. Jack advanced with the command group, positioned to observe and direct the Wolfpack teams. The Sherman column moved quickly across the rolling terrain, maintaining disciplined spacing to minimize vulnerability to artillery. First contact came at 0723. German anti-tank guns opened fire from concealed positions near the road junction. 2 standard Shermans took hits, one brewing up immediately with catastrophic ammunition fires. "Wolfpack Alpha, advance to position Bravo," Jack ordered. "Engage anti-tank positions from the eastern ridge." "Wolfpack Beta, continue advance to flanking position, Charlie. Continue advance." The Wolfpacks responded with practiced precision. The Fireflies deployed on elevated ground, their powerful 17-pounders identifying and eliminating the anti-tank positions with methodical fire. The Easy 8s maintained protective positions, their faster-firing 76mm guns suppressing infantry attempts to approach with portable anti-tank weapons. "Enemy armor detected," came the radio call from a forward observer. 5 Panther tanks advancing from the northwest. 2 Tiger IIs in overwatch position on the hill marked reference point Delta. The moment of truth had arrived. Standard Sherman doctrine would have called for evasive action against such formidable opposition. The Wolfpack strategy demanded the opposite: coordinated aggressive engagement. "All Wolfpack elements implement Hunter Protocol," Jack ordered. "Fireflies' priority targets are Tiger IIs at reference Delta. Easy 8s establish blocking positions against the Panther advance." Through his binoculars, Jack observed the Wolfpacks execute the planned response. The Fireflies traversed their long guns toward the distant Tiger IIs, range approximately 1,600 yards, well within the 17-pounders' effective range, but beyond the accurate reach of the German 88mm guns in the hilly terrain. The first Firefly shot echoed across the battlefield. Through his binoculars, Jack tracked the round, seeing it strike the lead Tiger II's turret face, a direct hit that would have merely dented the armor with a standard 75mm shell. The 17-pounder round, however, punched through. Seconds later, smoke poured from the German tank's open hatches as the crew abandoned the disabled vehicle. Confirmed hit, Tiger 1, Firefly 2, engage second Tiger. The Wolfpack strategy was working precisely as designed. The Fireflies engaged the heaviest German armor from standoff range, while the Easy 8s protected against flanking maneuvers by the more numerous Panthers. The German commander, clearly surprised by the unexpected long-range penetration capability of the modified Shermans, attempted to adjust his tactics. The remaining Tiger II tried to withdraw to more favorable terrain, while the Panthers accelerated their flanking attempt. "They're adapting," Jack noted to his operations officer. "Expect them to try to close distance with the Fireflies. Their 88mm will penetrate at any range if they get a clean shot." As if confirming his assessment, German artillery began laying smoke to cover the armored advance. The battlefield visibility deteriorated rapidly. "Wolfpack elements, adjust to contingency formation," Jack ordered. "Fireflies displaced to secondary positions. Easy 8s prepare for close engagement." The Wolfpacks demonstrated their tactical flexibility, adjusting to the changing battlefield conditions. Fireflies relocated to maintain standoff capability, while Easy 8s tightened their protective screen. The battle intensified as the German Panthers emerged from the smoke at closer range than anticipated. An Easy 8 from Wolfpack Beta took a direct hit but survived, the improved armor layout preventing ammunition ignition. The crew returned fire, tracking the Panther as it attempted to maneuver for another shot. Wolfpack Alpha, Firefly 2 reporting clear line of sight to Tiger 2, range 1,200 yards, preparing to engage. Approved, take the shot. Another distinctive crack of the 17-pounder, followed by confirmation of a penetrating hit on the second Tiger 2. The German heavy tank slewed sideways, immobilized but still capable of returning fire with its deadly 80mm gun. For the next 30 minutes, the battle ebbed and flowed across the rolling countryside. The Wolfpacks maintained their integrated tactics despite casualties. One Firefly disabled by a lucky artillery hit, 2 Easy 8s damaged but still operational. The German force suffered heavier losses, with both Tiger IIs knocked out and 3 Panthers destroyed or abandoned. By over 900 hours, the strategic road junction was secured. The remnants of the German armored force retreated, leaving the breakout corridor vulnerable to Allied advance. The Wolfpack concept had proven its value in actual combat, validating Jack's integrated approach against the most formidable German armor. As Jack surveyed the battlefield from a captured German observation post, General Patton arrived by jeep, his distinctive figure unmistakable even at a distance. "Impressive performance, Captain," Patton announced, surveying the knocked-out German tanks visible across the landscape. "Your Wolfpacks functioned exactly as you theorized. The after-action reports show significantly lower casualties than Doctrine would have predicted against Tiger IIs. The men executed perfectly, sir, and the equipment performed as expected. The Firefly's standoff capability combined with the Easy 8's maneuverability created tactical options unavailable with either variant alone." Patton nodded thoughtfully. "I've already communicated the preliminary results to SHAEF headquarters. General Eisenhower is quite interested in expanding the Wolfpack deployment. The British are accelerating the conversion program, 100 more Fireflies expected within the week." Jack felt a profound sense of validation. The integrated approach had proven its worth in combat, confirming what his technical evaluation had indicated. More importantly, American tank crews now had the equipment and tactics to face German heavy armor, with realistic chances of survival. As they walked among the battered but victorious tanks of the 761st, Patton offered an unexpected observation. "You know, Steele, the war won't last forever. When it ends, we'll need men who understand both the technical and tactical aspects of armored warfare to develop the next generation of American tanks. One challenge at a time, sir. We still have a long road to Berlin." "Indeed, but keep it in mind." Patton surveyed the assembly of tanks, the longer-gunned Fireflies interspersed with the more numerous Easy 8s. "Your contribution here extends beyond this battlefield. You've demonstrated that balanced integration of specialized capabilities achieves more than pure standardization." Jack thought of Robert, of the letter that had driven him to fight not just the Germans, but the institutional resistance to equipment improvements. His son's sacrifice had led to changes that would save countless other young men from similar fate. As he watched replacement crews arriving to man the damaged tanks, Jack felt a sense of purpose stronger than any he had experienced since receiving that fateful telegram. The Wolfpack strategy worked. The integrated approach saved lives. The battle for better equipment had been worth fighting. Chapter 10, Moment of Truth. 3 weeks after the successful Road Junction operation, Jack found himself in the headquarters of the 4th Armored Division, briefing senior commanders on Wolfpack deployment. The Anglo-American conversion program had exceeded all expectations, with over 200 Firefly-equipped Shermans now serving alongside Easy 8s in integrated units throughout the Allied advance. The operational data confirms our initial projections, Jack explained to the assembled officers. Armored units employing the Wolfpack configuration show 42% higher effectiveness against German heavy tanks and 23% lower casualty rates compared to standard deployments. Colonel Anderson, the division's commander, studied the performance charts with experienced eyes. The results are impressive, Captain, but maintenance reports indicate higher mechanical failure rates for the Firefly variants, particularly transmission and powertrain issues. A valid concern, sir, Jack acknowledged. The additional weight of the 17-pounder stresses components designed for the lighter standard turret. We've implemented preventive maintenance protocols to address those vulnerabilities, and British technical teams are developing reinforced components for the next conversion batch. The briefing continued, with Jack fielding questions about tactical adjustments, ammunition logistics, and crew training requirements. Throughout, he emphasized the fundamental principle of the Wolfpack approach. Integrated specialized capabilities creating tactical options unavailable with homogeneous units. As the meeting concluded, a messenger arrived with urgent dispatches. Colonel Anderson read them quickly, his expression grave. Intelligence reports a major German counterattack forming in the Ardennes sector. Heavy armor concentrations, including Tiger II battalions supported by infantry and artillery. They appear to be attempting a breakthrough toward Antwerp. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. This was the German offensive that strategic planners had feared, a desperate gamble to split the Allied advance and potentially reverse the war's momentum. The 4th Armored will redeploy immediately to reinforce the threatened sector, Anderson announced. Captain Steele, given your expertise with anti-heavy tank tactics, I'm attaching you to our operations staff for the duration. We'll need your Wolfpack strategy more than ever against this concentration of German armor. Within hours, Jack found himself in a forward command post near the Belgian border, analyzing intelligence reports on the developing German offensive. The situation was dire. German armor had achieved surprise, punching through thinly held Allied positions in the Ardennes forest. Leading elements included multiple heavy panzer battalions with Tigers and Panthers, advancing rapidly in winter conditions that neutralize Allied air superiority. They've committed their strategic reserve, observed Major Williams, the division intelligence officer. Nearly 600 tanks, including at least 70 Tiger IIs. Our forward units are reporting catastrophic losses trying to slow their advance with standard Shermans. Jack studied the deployment maps, identifying critical terrain features and potential engagement zones. How many Firefly-equipped units do we have available? 23 operational Fireflies within the division, Williams replied. Another 36 expected with the 10th Armored reinforcements arriving tomorrow. Not enough for conventional deployment, Jack murmured, calculating possibilities. The standard Wolfpack configuration would disperse these specialized tanks too thinly across the threatened sector. A new approach was needed, one that concentrated their heavy tank-killing capability at decisive points rather than distributing it evenly across the front. Jack began sketching a modified deployment plan, creating what he termed super packs, concentrated formations with 4 Fireflies supported by 8 Easy 8s. We create hunter-killer groups specifically targeting German heavy armor, he explained as Colonel Anderson joined them. Instead of reacting defensively to Tiger encounters, we actively hunt them with concentrated firepower. Anderson studied the concept skeptically. This concentrates our Firefly assets rather than distributing them for broader coverage. German heavy tanks are doing the same, operating in concentrated battalions rather than dispersed support units. We match concentration with concentration, specialized capability against specialized capability. The planning continued through the night, with Jack developing detailed tactical protocols for the super pack formations. By dawn, the modified deployment orders were dispatched to forward units, redirecting the precious Firefly-equipped Shermans to form the specialized hunter-killer groups. Jack joined the lead elements of the 4th Armored as they moved toward the critical road junction at Bastogne. Intelligence indicated a major concentration of German armor advancing on the strategically vital crossroads. If Bastogne fell, the entire Allied right flank would be compromised. Snow fell heavily as the column advanced, reducing visibility and complicating movement. The EZ-8s handled the adverse conditions better than standard Shermans, their improved suspension and wider tracks providing superior traction in the snow-covered terrain. First super pack in position overlooking St. Vith Road, came the radio report. No enemy contact yet, but refugee reports indicate Tiger elements approximately 5 kilometers east. Maintain position, Jack instructed. Additional super packs deploying to flanking positions within the hour. No engagement until full formation is established. By midday, 3 super packs had deployed in a defensive arc covering the approaches to Bastogne. Each concentrated group positioned Fireflies on elevated terrain with interlocking fields of fire, while EZ-8s established screening positions to protect against infantry infiltration and flanking maneuvers. The first contact came at 14:35 hours, a probing attack by German reconnaissance elements testing the American defenses. Standard Sherman units engaged these lighter forces effectively, preserving the super packs for their specialized role against heavy armor. Major German armor formation detected advancing along Route N15, reported forward observers. Composition appears to be full Tiger battalion with Panther support, estimated 40-plus heavy tanks. All super pack elements. Prepare for primary mission, Jack ordered. Maintain concealment until German heavies reach designated engagement zones. The waiting was perhaps the most difficult part. Jack moved between observation posts, confirming that each super pack maintained proper positioning and tactical discipline. The success of the hunter-killer concept depended on coordinated engagement at optimal ranges, allowing the German heavies to advance into killing zones where multiple Fireflies could engage from different angles, maximizing the 17-pounders' penetration capability against the formidable frontal armor of the Tiger IIs. At 16:10 hours, the main German armored thrust appeared, a textbook Panzer formation with Tiger IIs in the center, Panthers on the flanks, and infantry support following in half-tracks. They advanced with confidence, unaware of the specialized anti-heavy tank formations waiting in concealed positions. Super Pack Alpha, you have engagement authority, Jack radioed from his forward observation post. Multiple 17-pounder shots on lead elements. Super Packs Beta and Gamma hold positions. The coordinated volley from Super Pack Alpha's 4 Fireflies was devastating. 3 Tiger IIs took penetrating hits within seconds, their commanders unprepared for effective fire at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards. The German formation faltered, commanders visible in turrets as they attempted to identify the threat. Super Pack Beta, engage right flank elements. Super Pack Gamma, prepare for left flank engagement if they attempt to redeploy. The integrated hunter-killer groups executed the plan with precision. Fireflies engaged heavy armor targets methodically, while EZ-8s maintained protective screens and engaged supporting elements. The German commanders, trained in tactics that assumed Sherman inferiority, found themselves suddenly facing American tanks that could penetrate their armor from standoff ranges. Within 20 minutes, the German advance had stalled completely. 7 Tiger IIs and 11 Panthers stood burning or abandoned with minimal American losses. The remaining German armor attempted to withdraw to more favorable terrain, but coordinated action by the super packs prevented effective redeployment. By nightfall, the German offensive toward Bastogne had been comprehensively defeated. The concentrated application of specialized anti-heavy tank capability had overcome what should have been an overwhelming German armored advantage. In the command post that evening, Colonel Anderson reviewed the preliminary after-action reports with visible satisfaction. The super pack concept exceeded expectations, Captain. German armor losses approximately 60% with our casualties under 15%, unprecedented against Tiger formations. The principle remains the same as the original Wolfpack strategy, Jack explained. Specialized capabilities deployed in integrated formations, maximizing complementary strengths while minimizing individual vulnerabilities. SHAEF headquarters is already requesting detailed briefings on the tactical deployment, Anderson noted. General Eisenhower specifically mentioned your contribution in this afternoon's communication. Jack accepted this acknowledgement with professional modesty. but internally felt profound validation. The concepts he had championed, first in technical evaluation and now in tactical application, had proven their worth in the most demanding combat conditions against the most formidable German armor. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Jack wrote in his personal journal, something he had done infrequently since receiving the telegram about Robert's death. The day's events had prompted reflection about the journey that had brought him here, from grieving father to tank commander to tactical innovator. Today I witnessed the full potential of the integrated approach, he wrote, not just in technical specifications or controlled evaluations, but in actual combat against the most formidable German armor. The super PACs achieved what conventional wisdom deemed impossible: decisive victory against superior Tiger II formations. He paused, pen hovering over paper, then continued with more personal thoughts. I think of Robert constantly during these engagements. Every American tank crew that survives an encounter with German heavies, because of the Firefly's capabilities, represents a victory against the circumstances that took him from us. This isn't resurrection, but it is redemption of a sort. The following morning brought news that the broader German offensive, what would later be called the Battle of the Bulge, had been contained. The critical contribution of the Super PAC formations in the Bastogne sector had prevented a strategic breakthrough that might have drastically altered the campaign timeline. General Patton himself arrived to review the Super PAC deployment and results. The flamboyant commander inspected disabled German Tigers with keen interest, examining penetration damage from 17-pounder rounds with professional appreciation. "You've created something significant here, Steele," he observed as they walked among the battlefield remnants. "Not just a technical solution or a tactical adjustment, but a fundamental revision to armored doctrine against superior enemy equipment." The principle was always there, sir: integrated specialized capabilities achieving more than homogeneous deployments could. Perhaps, but principles without practical application remain merely theoretical. Patton surveyed the assembly of American tanks preparing for continued advance. The distinctive long-gun Fireflies interspersed with the Easy-8s in their Super PAC formations. "You've given us the tools to face the best German armor on equal terms, despite our industrial emphasis on standardization and mass production." As they returned to the command post, Patton shared unexpected news. "SHAEF is forming a special technical tactical advisory group for armored operations. General Eisenhower wants you to head it, effective immediately, Colonels Eagles included." Jack was momentarily speechless. The promotion to colonel represented formal recognition of his contributions beyond the temporary field command Patton had initially granted. "The group will evaluate all aspects of current and future armored operations," Patton continued. "Your unique background, engineering expertise combined with combat command experience, makes you ideally suited to bridge the gap between technical development and tactical application." "I'm honored, sir, but there's still fighting ahead." "Indeed there is, and your contribution will help ensure we face it with optimal equipment and tactics." Patton fixed him with an intense stare. "The war will end eventually, Steele. When it does, the lessons you have demonstrated here must inform our future armored development. The integration of specialized capabilities, the balance of tactical flexibility against technical superiority. These principles transcend this particular conflict." The next morning, newly promoted Colonel Jack Steele departed for SHAEF headquarters to establish the Technical Tactical Advisory Group. As his jeep pulled away from the 4th Armored Command Post, he caught a final glimpse of Super PAC Alpha preparing for advance operations, Fireflies and Easy-8s in their integrated formation, the physical embodiment of the principles he had championed against institutional resistance. He carried Robert's watch in his breast pocket, its familiar weight a constant connection to the personal mission that had driven him from grieving father to combat innovator. The integrated approach had proven its worth in the crucible of battle against Germany's most formidable armor. American tank crews now faced their enemies with equipment and tactics that gave them a fighting chance, not merely as targets for superior German technology, but as effective combatants in their own right. It wasn't resurrection, but it was redemption. Chapter 11. Legacy of Steele. April 1945. The war in Europe approached its climax as Allied forces pushed into Germany from west and east. Colonel Jack Steele stood on a hill overlooking the Rhine, watching as an armored column crossed pontoon bridges in the early morning light. The distinctive silhouettes of Firefly and Easy-8 Shermans were clearly visible among the vehicles. integrated wolfpack formations now standard throughout American armored units. "Quite the view, isn't it?" observed General Toffman, joining him at the observation point. The Ordnance Department chief had arrived for a first-hand assessment of the armored deployment he had initially questioned. "Your integrated approach has exceeded all projections, Colonel. Casualty rates down 34% in tank versus tank engagements since full implementation." Jack nodded acknowledgement. The British conversion program was the key. Without their cooperation, we couldn't have deployed sufficient Fireflies to make the Wolfpack concept viable at scale. Anglo-American cooperation at its finest, though I recall considerable resistance to the concept initially. Hoffman's eyes twinkled with understated humor. "Production efficiency and standardization were quite the sacred cows before your evaluation demonstrated the tactical advantages of specialization." "The evidence spoke for itself, sir. Rarely does evidence alone prevail against entrenched interests, Dito. Your persistence made the difference." Hoffman surveyed the advancing column thoughtfully. "The technical tactical advisory group you've established has become quite influential. Your recommendations on future tank development have attracted considerable attention from both military and production authorities." In the months since the Battle of the Bulge, Jack had divided his time between frontline tactical support and strategic development work. The advisory group had expanded to include British representatives, creating a collaborative approach to future Allied armored doctrine based on combat lessons from the European campaign. "The fundamental principle remains valid regardless of specific vehicle types," Jack explained. "Balanced integration of specialized capabilities achieves more than homogeneous deployment of standardized designs. The next generation of American tanks should reflect that understanding from initial conception rather than retrofit adaptation." Hoffman nodded agreement. "Speaking of which, the preliminary designs for the new T-26 Pershing incorporate many of your recommendations: heavier armor, more powerful gun, improved mobility, all balanced rather than maximizing any single characteristic at the expense of others." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a staff officer with urgent dispatches. Hoffman read them quickly, his expression lighting with barely contained excitement. "American armor has reached Magdeburg. The German defensive line has collapsed completely. Berlin is expected to fall within weeks." He handed the dispatch to Jack. "Your wolf packs are leading the advance, Colonel. The integrated formations have proven particularly effective in the fluid combat conditions of the German collapse." Jack studied the operational maps with professional satisfaction. The Sherman in both its Firefly and Easy 8 variants had proven itself a worthy opponent for the best German armor when properly deployed in integrated formations. American tankers no longer faced Tigers and Panthers at hopeless disadvantage, but engaged them with realistic chances of success. That evening, Jack joined a gathering of technical and tactical specialists at SHAEF headquarters. The meeting's nominal purpose was planning for final operations, but an undercurrent of anticipation pervaded the discussions. Everyone recognized the European conflict was reaching its conclusion. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood, the British officer who had facilitated the Anglo-American conversion program, approached Jack with a glass of whiskey. "To successful collaboration, Colonel. Your integrated approach has served both our nations admirably." They toasted quietly, professional satisfaction tempered by awareness of the costs involved in reaching this point. "The War Office has been most impressed with your technical tactical advisory group's recommendations," Blackwood continued, "particularly the emphasis on balanced design philosophy rather than maximizing specific characteristics. Our next generation Centurion tank incorporates similar principles: firepower, protection, and mobility and equilibrium, rather than emphasizing any single aspect." "The natural evolution of the lessons we've learned," Jack acknowledged. "No perfect tank exists for all conditions, but balanced designs with complementary capabilities provide tactical flexibility across the broadest range of combat scenarios." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Eisenhower himself. The Supreme Allied Commander rarely attended technical meetings, making his presence particularly significant. "Gentlemen," Eisenhower addressed the assembled specialists, "as you're aware, the European conflict approaches its conclusion. While our focus remains on completing current operations, we must also consider the future implications of our experiences." He gestured toward Jack. "Colonel Steele's work integrating specialized capabilities within standardized formations represents one of the most significant tactical innovations of the campaign. The Wolfpack concept demonstrated that balanced specialization achieves superior results compared to pure standardization, despite the production efficiencies of the latter. Eisenhower continued, outlining his vision for post-war military development that maintained the lessons learned during the conflict. Jack listened with growing appreciation for the general's strategic perspective, which extended well beyond the immediate tactical considerations to long-term force development. Colonel Steele, Eisenhower concluded, I'm establishing a permanent joint technical tactical development command to continue the work your advisory group has begun. Your appointment as its first commander is effective immediately, with promotion to brigadier general. The announcement caught Jack by surprise. The new command represented institutional recognition of the principles he had championed, the integration of technical development with tactical application, balanced specialization rather than pure standardization. The command will include both American and British elements, Eisenhower continued, maintaining the successful collaboration you've established. Your first priority will be comprehensive evaluation of armored operations during this campaign, with recommendations for future development incorporating all lessons learned. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Jack reflected on the extraordinary journey from factory engineer to general officer. The telegram about Robert had set him on this path, grief and determination driving him to fight not just the Germans, but the institutional inertia that valued production convenience over combat effectiveness. He removed Robert's watch from his pocket, its familiar weight a tangible connection to his son. The technical and tactical innovations he had championed had saved countless American lives in the campaign's final stages. Tank crews now faced German heavy armor with equipment and tactics that gave them realistic chances of survival and success. It wasn't resurrection, but it was a legacy worthy of Robert's sacrifice. The following week brought news of Germany's unconditional surrender. As Allied forces consolidated control over occupied territories, Jack found himself increasingly focused on the evaluation and documentation aspects of his new command. The comprehensive lessons of armored operations needed proper analysis and integration into future doctrine before their impact faded from institutional memory. During an inspection tour of captured German tank facilities, Jack encountered Major General Thomason from the Ordnance Department, one of the officials who had initially opposed the integrated approach as disruptive to production efficiency. Quite the collection of hardware, Thomason observed as they examined a Tiger II undergoing technical evaluation. Impressive engineering in many respects, though over-specialized for their strategic situation. The Germans emphasized technical superiority at the expense of production volume, Jack agreed. The opposite of our initial approach was standardized Shermans. The optimal solution, as we discovered, lay between these extremes. Balanced designs deployed in integrated formations, leveraging specialized capabilities. Thomason nodded thoughtfully. Your Wolfpack concept demonstrated that principle conclusively, though I admit I was skeptical initially about disrupting our production standardization for the Firefly conversions. Understandably so, given the production priorities at that stage of the war. Jack maintained professional courtesy despite recalling the man's active resistance to his recommendations. The Anglo-American conversion program provided an elegant solution, maintaining standardized production while creating specialized capability through focused modification. A lesson for future development, Thomason acknowledged. Balance between production efficiency and tactical effectiveness, standardization and specialization. Your new command is well positioned to ensure these principles inform our post-war armored development. As they continued their inspection, Jack recognized the conversation as symbolic of the broader institutional shift. The principles he had championed against significant resistance had become accepted doctrine, their value demonstrated so conclusively in combat that even initial opponents now acknowledged their merit. 3 weeks later, General Eisenhower hosted a small ceremony at SHAEF headquarters, formally activating the Joint Technical Tactical Development Command under Jack's leadership. Representatives from both American and British forces attended, symbolizing the collaborative nature of the new organization. This command embodies a fundamental lesson from our campaign, Eisenhower stated during the brief ceremony. Technical development must be integrated with tactical application from inception rather than adaptation. Brigadier General Steele's experience bridging these worlds, from factory engineer to combat commander, provides ideal perspective for this crucial work. After the formal proceedings, Jack found himself momentarily alone with Eisenhower. The Supreme Commander studied him with thoughtful eyes. You've accomplished something remarkable, Steele. changed entrenched doctrine through persistent evidence and practical demonstration. He paused. I understand this journey began with personal tragedy, your son's death in North Africa. Jack nodded, surprised by Eisenhower's awareness of this personal dimension. Robert's last letter described the inadequacy of standard Shermans against German Tigers. His experience drove me to seek improvements that might save other young men from similar fate. A worthy tribute, Eisenhower said quietly, and one with impact far beyond this particular conflict. The principles you have established, balanced specialization, integrated capabilities, technical-tactical alignment, will influence armored development for generations to come. The prediction proved accurate. In the post-war years, General Jack Steele's Joint Technical Tactical Development Command became the centerpiece of Allied armored doctrine evolution. The next generation of American tanks, the patent series that succeeded the Sherman, incorporated the balanced design philosophy he had championed, with firepower, protection, and mobility in equilibrium, rather than emphasizing any single characteristic. More significantly, the Wolfpack concept evolved into fundamental doctrine for armored deployment, specialized variants operating in integrated formations to create tactical capabilities greater than homogeneous units could achieve. This approach influenced NATO standardization agreements, shaping Western armored doctrine throughout the Cold War era. On the 10th anniversary of VE Day, now Lieutenant General Jack Steele stood beside a gleaming new M48 patent tank at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. As chairman of the Joint Armored Development Board, he had overseen the evolution of American tank design philosophy from wartime expediency to balanced capability. A young captain conducting a training tour approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir, the cadets would be honored if you'd share some perspectives on armored doctrine development." Jack surveyed the assembled officer candidates with measured assessment. These young men represented the future of American armored forces, the inheritors of hard-won lessons from the European campaign. The fundamental principle remains constant despite technological evolution, he told them, resting his hand on the patent tank's hull. No perfect tank exists for all conditions. The optimal approach balances specialized capabilities in integrated formations, creating tactical options unavailable to homogeneous units. He described the evolution from standardized Shermans to integrated Wolfpacks, the technical and institutional challenges overcome, the lessons incorporated into subsequent designs. Throughout, he emphasized the human dimension, the tank crews whose survival and effectiveness represented the ultimate metric of success. As the tour concluded, an older cadet approached privately. "Sir, my father served with the 761st Tank Battalion. He operated a Firefly in one of your first Wolfpacks. He always said you saved countless lives by fighting for better equipment." Jack was momentarily transported back to those crucial days. The evaluation trials in England, the institutional resistance to the integrated approach, the validation in combat against German Tigers. "We all played our parts," he responded simply. "The men who operated those tanks in combat demonstrated the concept's value far more effectively than any technical evaluation could." Later that evening, alone in his office at the Pentagon, Jack removed Robert's watch from his desk drawer. He kept it there always, a personal touchstone connecting his current work to its emotional foundation. The watch no longer functioned, its mechanism finally surrendering to time and wear, but its significance remained undiminished. "We did it, son," he said quietly to the silent timepiece. "Changed how tanks are designed and deployed. Saved lives that might otherwise have been lost, as yours was." He paused, emotion temporarily overcoming his habitual reserve. "Your sacrifice wasn't wasted. It became a foundation for improvements that extended far beyond that battlefield in North Africa." The technical and tactical innovations Jack had championed continued influencing armored development long after his eventual retirement. The balanced design philosophy became standard doctrine, with new generations of tanks incorporating the principles he had established. Specialized capabilities deployed in integrated formations to create tactical options unavailable to homogeneous units. His most significant contribution, however, transcended specific tank designs or tactical formations. By successfully bridging the gap between technical development and tactical application, Jack Steele had established a new approach to military equipment evolution, one that valued combat effectiveness over production convenience, that recognized the complementary nature of specialized capabilities, and that measured success by the lives saved rather than the units produced. It wasn't resurrection, But as legacies go, it honored Robert's sacrifice in the most meaningful way possible by ensuring other sons returned home to their fathers. Chapter 12, The Steele Connection. Detroit, Michigan, 1973. Retired Lieutenant General Jack Steele, now 75 years old, stood before the newly dedicated Armored Forces Memorial. The bronze sculpture depicted a Sherman tank crew, figures frozen in eternal vigilance as they scanned the horizon for threats. Hundreds of veterans had gathered for the ceremony, many wearing the distinctive patches of World War II armored divisions. "Quite something, isn't it?" observed a familiar voice beside him. Jack turned to find Colonel James Blackwood, his former British counterpart, now similarly retired and silver-haired. "James, I didn't know you were in the States." They shook hands warmly, their friendship having endured through decades of collaboration. "Wouldn't have missed this," Blackwood replied. "The Sherman tank crews deserve their monument, and you deserve recognition for what you accomplished on their behalf." Jack waved this away with characteristic modesty. "The men who fought in those tanks are the ones who deserve recognition. I merely helped provide better equipment." They moved through the crowd of veterans, many of whom recognized Jack and approached with heartfelt gratitude. Time and again, former tankers shared stories of Wolfpack operations, of Fireflies engaging German heavies from standoff ranges, while Easy Eights provided protective support. "Your integrated approach saved my entire crew outside Bastogne," recalled one elderly veteran. "Our Firefly took out 2 Tigers at ranges that would have been suicide with standard Shermans." After the formal ceremonies concluded, Jack and Blackwood found a quiet corner in the reception hall. Their conversation turned reflective, as often happens when old soldiers reunite. "Your work changed armored warfare fundamentally," Blackwood observed. "The balanced design philosophy, the integrated deployment doctrine, they've become standard throughout NATO." "Evolution, not revolution," Jack demurred. "The principles were always there, waiting to be recognized and applied." "Perhaps, but it took someone with your unique perspective to champion them effectively. Engineering expertise combined with combat command experience." Blackwood studied his old friend thoughtfully. "And personal motivation that transcended professional obligation." Jack nodded, acknowledging this deeper dimension. "Robert's death gave me purpose beyond technical optimization or tactical improvement. Every tank crew that survived because of better equipment or doctrine represented redemption of sorts." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a distinguished middle-aged man in army dress uniform, a full colonel with numerous combat decorations. "General Steele, Colonel Michael Martinez, 4th Armored Division. My father was Frank Martinez, your gunner in North Africa." Jack's expression brightened with recognition. "Eagle Eye Martinez, the best shot in the 6th Armored. He survived the war then?" "Yes, sir. Served another 20 years before retiring. He passed in '68, but he spoke of you often, especially your fight to get better equipment for the tankers." Colonel Martinez extended his hand. "He always said you cared more about the men than the machines. That made all the difference." As Martinez shared stories of his father's post-war life, Jack felt a profound sense of connectedness across time. The young sergeant who had served under his command had raised a son who continued the military tradition, a living legacy extending beyond the technical and tactical innovations to the human dimension that ultimately mattered most. Later that evening, Jack and Blackwood continued their reunion at Jack's hotel. Their conversation ranged across decades of shared experiences, from those crucial days testing Sherman variants in England to post-war collaboration on NATO armored doctrine. "Did you ever imagine our improvised solution would have such lasting impact?" Blackwood asked. "The Anglo-American conversion program was initially just a workaround for production limitations, yet it established principles that have guided armored development for 30 years. Necessity driving innovation," Jack reflected. "The Sherman was never designed to face Panthers and Tigers. We had to adapt or accept catastrophic losses. The integrated approach, Fireflies for anti-armor standoff capability, Easy Eights for maneuver and support, created options from existing resources rather than waiting for perfect solutions. A principle that transcends specific equipment," Blackwood noted. "Balanced specialization rather than homogeneous standardization, the very foundation of modern combined arms doctrine." The following morning, Jack visited the Detroit Tank Arsenal, now substantially repurposed for civilian production but maintaining a museum dedicated to its wartime role. As chief engineer before joining the Army, he had helped transition the facility from automobile manufacturing to tank production, overseeing technical aspects of early Sherman development. The museum curator, learning of his visit, provided a private tour of the collection. Among the exhibits stood a restored Sherman Firefly, its distinctive long 17-pounder gun immediately recognizable. This particular vehicle served with the 761st Tank Battalion, the curator explained. Part of your original Wolfpack deployment, it recorded confirmed kills against 3 Tiger IIs and numerous Panthers before the war's end. Jack ran his hand along the tank's hull, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. This machine, this integration of American chassis and British gun, represented the physical embodiment of the principles he had championed against institutional resistance: balanced specialization, integrated capabilities, technical tactical alignment. We've recently acquired something you might find particularly meaningful, the curator continued, leading him to a special display case. Inside, protected behind glass, lay a weathered technical manual for the Sherman M4A3. A handwritten notation on the cover caught Jack's attention immediately. Property of Tech Sergeant Robert Steele, 2nd Armored Division. Jack stared at the familiar handwriting, momentarily speechless. It was discovered during restoration work on a tank recovered from North Africa, the curator explained gently. When we researched the name, we realized the connection to you. We thought you should have it. With careful reverence, the curator opened the case and presented the manual to Jack. As he accepted it, a folded paper slipped from between its pages, a handwritten letter he instantly recognized as the final correspondence he had received from his son. We found this inside, the curator said quietly. It appears to be a letter he was drafting but never sent. With trembling fingers, Jack unfolded the paper. The date indicated it had been written the day before Robert's final battle. Dad, tomorrow we face Tigers again. The intelligence reports indicate at least 5 of them supporting a German counterattack. Our 75mm guns might as well be throwing rocks. But I've been thinking about your ideas on balanced design. What if we combined our Sherman's mobility with a gun powerful enough to penetrate Tiger armor? The British 17-pounder might work if properly adapted. Something to discuss with your engineering colleagues when you get this. Meanwhile, I'll do what I can with what we have. Your son, Robert. Jack stood motionless, the implications washing over him. Robert hadn't just reported the Sherman's inadequacies. He had been thinking about potential solutions along the very lines that Jack would later champion. The integrated approach that became the Wolfpack strategy had roots in his son's own tactical insights. He was thinking the same way, Jack said softly, seeking the same solutions I would eventually implement. The curator respectfully withdrew, leaving Jack alone with this unexpected connection across time. The technical manual and letter represented more than memorabilia. They were tangible evidence that Robert's thinking had aligned with the approach Jack developed after his death. The emotional impact was profound. Throughout the years of technical evaluation, institutional resistance, and tactical implementation, Jack had been driven by the belief that he was honoring Robert's sacrifice by improving the equipment that had failed him. Now he discovered that Robert himself had been considering similar solutions, a shared technical-tactical perspective that transcended their separation. Later that day, Jack visited Arlington National Cemetery, where Robert had been interred after the war. Standing before the simple headstone, he placed the technical manual in letter beside the white marble. You saw it too, he said quietly. The need for balanced capability, for integrated solutions rather than standardized inadequacy. Everything I fought for after your death, you were already envisioning before yours. The connection across time and space provided unexpected comfort. His technical and tactical innovations hadn't merely been a father's tribute to a fallen son. They had been a continuation of Robert's own professional journey, an extension of thinking they had shared without realizing it. As Jack prepared to depart, he removed Robert's watch from his pocket and wound it one final time. Though it had stopped functioning years ago, the familiar motion connected him to the countless times he had performed the same action during the crucial days of evaluation and implementation. The legacy continues, he told the silent headstone. The principles you started thinking about have become doctrine. The integrated approach saved countless lives during the war and continues shaping armored development today. He placed the watch beside the technical manual and letter, completing the circle of connection. These personal artifacts had accompanied him throughout his journey from grieving father to technical innovator to doctrinal architect. Now they could rest where they belonged, with the young man whose sacrifice had inspired their significance. Mission accomplished, son, Jack said softly. Mission accomplished.